Chapter 771. Yuzhou, Hidden Dragon Sea. The warm sunshine sprinkled in the spacious office. Behind the desk, Li Huaqing silently looked at the document in his hand, narrowed his eyes, and took a sip of tea. The content of the document was very formal, with the seal of the Wuxia Parliament. It could be said to be a recommendation letter, and it was a recommendation letter that did not go through the normal procedures. Wang Qinglei, the speaker of Wuxia, recommended the deputy governor of Wuxia to be the deputy speaker of a province in western Zhongzhou state. The provincial parliament was generally not qualified to do so, but Wang Qinglei was different. He was a member of Zhongzhou state. Therefore, although this recommendation letter had the signatures of most of the directors of Wuxia, it could actually be said that Wang Qinglei proposed a personal transfer as a member of parliament. This document did not pass through the Ministry of Personnel and appeared directly on Li Huaqing's desk. In just a few hours, Prime Minister Chen Fangqing had received the news. The two sat face to face, thinking about the contents of the document, and no one spoke for a while. "What do you think?" Li Huaqing suddenly asked. "We can give it to him." Chen Fangqing didn't hesitate at all. On the way here, he had already thought of everything he needed to think about. Some of the possible consequences were also within his range of tolerance. He's under a lot of pressure now. It's equivalent to asking us for help. Plus, 1 year's time shouldn't be a problem. Wang Tonglu. Li Huaqing looked at the document and whispered to himself. Wang Tonglu was the deputy speaker of Wuxia that Wang Qinglei intended to transfer this time. He was one of the directors of Wuxia. He had served in Wuxia for a long time, deeply rooted and highly respected. With his qualifications, if he wanted to be transferred, it was almost no problem for him to become the governor of a province. He was the backbone of the Southeast Group. If Wuxia had not suffered a major change, he would have been the best candidate to be the governor of Wuxia after Wang Qinglei left Wuxia. In the past year, the internal situation of Zhongzhou state had changed, especially in the past 6 months. In the turbulent times, Wang Tonglu, who had been favored by others, had become gloomy. The reason was actually not complicated at all. Now Wang Tonglu could be said to be the only capable general of the Southeast Group among the 13 directors of Wuxia. Wang Qinglei could also be said to be a member of the Southeast Group, but everyone knew that he had almost completely fallen out with the Southeast Group. Wang Tonglu was a capable general who was truly loyal to the Southeast Group and Mount Dibing. There were many such capable generals in Wuxia before. However, as Wang Qinglei's actions in Wuxia became more and more intense, such people gradually became fewer and fewer. After Yu Chuingguang, the former mayor of Huding, became the governor of Wuxia, Wang Qinglei was even more free. As a close friend of Wang Xiaoyao, Yu Chuingguang's arrival could be said to be a blessing for Wang Xiao. It was Yao's official statement. He and Wang Qinglei cooperated very well. In a very short time, they had completely cleared out the forces loyal to Mount Dibing. If Wang Tonglu left, for the Southeast Group, Wuxia, the most developed province in Zhongzhou state that they had held for hundreds of years and had always been their backyard, would be completely lost. This was the core foundation of the Southeast Group. Li Huaqing hesitated. He was not distressed for the Southeast Group. In fact, this was their goal. And at this point, there was nothing to be distressed about. The Southeast Group had long lost control of Wuxia, but Wang Tonglu was there. At least he could be regarded as a fig leaf. Beihai and Wuxia were the two most core places of the Southeast Group. Now, when they were preparing to target Beihai, they wanted to tear off the fig leaf of Wuxia. Li Huaqing felt that they had gone too far. He was the president, so he must take the overall situation into consideration. If this step was so intense, it would undoubtedly cause a backlash from the Southeast Group, and the loss would undoubtedly outweigh the gain. Chen Fangqing knew his concerns. He hesitated and said slowly, "We still have to promise him. But the direction of Wang Tonglu's office is not very good. Let him be the governor. It is not appropriate to force him out and give him the position of deputy speaker." Li Huaqing nodded slowly. "I will communicate with Comrade Yi Dongxing on this matter later." Chen Fangqing nodded noncommittally. While supporting Wang Qinglei, he also had to take care of the face of the Southeast Group. The current situation was too sensitive. They had to maintain the situation while attacking. As long as Wang Tonglu could leave, it meant that Wang Qinglei had completely taken over Wuxia. Moreover, they did not have to worry about Wang Qinglei covering the sky in Wuxia for the time being. After all, he only had less than a year. After a year, he would come to Yuzhou. At that time, Yu Chuanguang would take advantage of the situation and become the new member and Wuxua's speaker. In this way, Wang Qinglei's faction would have a member and a director. This kind of strength was already a new group that was not weaker than the North group. Therefore, this step of Wang Tonglu's was very crucial. As long as Yi Dongxing agreed, it was okay to give him some benefits to balance the situation. Now the biggest target of the academics was Wuxia and Beihai. Next year, the governor of Wuxia was bound to be vacant. Whether the academics would get this position or give it to the prince group would depend on their harvest in Beihai a year later. We can give it to him. Li Huaqing finally nodded. But he also needs to speed up his actions. Chen Fangqing nodded, held the cup, and said, "I'll talk to him." Beihai's conscription is getting more and more outrageous. Li Huaqing took a deep breath, and his tone was a little solemn. Now the scale of the Beihai Corps had doubled, and hundreds of thousands of troops were training all day long. The army could be said to cover the sky and the sun, and the scale of the maneuver was getting larger and larger. These were undoubtedly warnings from Beihai to Zhongzhou State. Wang Xingxiao's strength at time was not meaningless. At least now, when the academics and the prince group targeted the southeast group again, they had begun to consider how to maintain the situation and take care of their thoughts. In the end, it was still the same sentence. Zhongzhou State versus Beihai. This was not a question of whether they could defeat them or whether they dared to fight. It was a question of whether it was necessary to fight. The answer was very simple. There was no need. There was no need at all. What they wanted was to control Beihai, that was all. But for Wang Xingxiao, he had his bottom line. There was no need to talk about the necessity of guarding Beihai. This was also not a question of whether they could defeat them or not, but whether they dared to fight. Wang Xingxiao dared to fight. He really dared to fight. The Wang family of Beihai had always kept a small number of nuclear weapons. The number of nuclear weapons was very small. If they were launched at Zhongzhou State was 100% sure that it could intercept all the nuclear weapons of Beihai outside Zhongzhou State, because they really did not have many nuclear weapons. But what if Wang Xingxiao wanted to use them in Beihai? No matter how few nuclear weapons they had, as long as they exploded in Beihai province, it was enough to completely sink 160,000 square kilometers of land in Beihai province to the bottom of the sea. The radiation and aftermath of the explosion could even affect Liaodong, which was closest to Beihai. If they really forced Wang Xingxiao to this point, Beihai province would be completely submerged by the sea and disappear from the map. Liaodong would suffer heavy losses. And what did Zhongzhou State get? Nothing was gained. This was not their original intention at all. Their original intention was not to destroy Beihai, but to control Beihai province. In this way, when Wang Xingxiao said that he really dared to fight, Zhongzhou State had to adjust its strategy. When their power expanded to the extent of the Wang family of Beihai, foreign enemies could bring them setbacks, but it was almost impossible to completely destroy them. The only way was to break their rule from the inside. Wang Qinglei. He was the most suitable candidate. As long as Wang Qinglei became the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, then everything could be discussed. Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing were willing to support Wang Qinglei. But Wang Qinglei also had to do something to put great pressure on the Wang family of Beihai in other aspects. What's his plan? Li Huaqing glanced at Chen Fangqing and asked slowly. Chen Fangqing took a sip of tea and said slowly, "I talked to him once before. He told me that in Europe, there is another His Majesty." Chapter 772. The soft light fell on some thin documents. Mel Ladd looked at His Majesty in front of him with a serious expression and silently waited for his orders. This was the underground laboratory in Italos. Every once in a while, His Majesty would appear here. Most of the time, this could be regarded as the place where he and Mel Ladd had agreed to meet. The air was heavy and silent. Mel Ladd, who had been waiting for a long time, finally couldn't help but say, "Your Majesty, are you going to make a move? What, are you scared?" His Majesty chuckled, picked up a peanut on the table, and put it into his mouth. In half a year's time, His Majesty's realm seemed to have become more and more unfathomable. The light that enveloped his body was vast and deep, like starlight, but also like clouds and mist. Even though Mellad was an expert who was close to the peak of the invincible realm, he couldn't see through his true appearance when facing him at this time. To be honest, a little. Mellad laughed. He was a little simple and honest. "But if your Majesty has an order, I will do it." His Majesty grunted and held the document without saying anything for a while. This was an internal document from the Parliament of Xianxia State. Of course, it was a copy, not the original. The original copy had appeared on the desk of the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel of Xianxia State a day ago, and the Ministry of Personnel had sent the document to Wuxia Province as soon as possible, appointing Deputy Governor Wang Tonglu, the director of Wuxia Province, as the governor of a province in Xianxia State. The document had come into effect. A few hours ago, Wuxia had already held a farewell party. Wang Tonglu, the backbone of the Southeast Group, had already left Wuxia dejectedly. This also meant that Wang Qinglei and Yu Chuingguang had completely cut off Wuxia from the Southeast Group's hands and firmly controlled it. It had become the core base and base of their new group. Mellad had already read the document. He also knew what this meant. Wu Yu was a gift from the Central State Parliament to Wang Qinglei. Vaguely, he was also expressing his support for Wang Qinglei's decision to establish his own sect. After giving such a big gift, Wang Qinglei had to return the favor. "Don't worry," His Majesty said slowly, "wait a little longer." "But preparations must be made," Mellad said softly. "Besides, the preparation is almost complete. 6 Knights Commanders, 12 Grand Knights, and 200 Knights Templar can set off at any time." Their cooperation with the Church had been completely finalized, and they were the closest long-term allies. The Pope had already fully expressed his trust and welcome to His Majesty. All of this was because of a story that His Majesty had told the Pope half a year ago, or the story the Pope had seen. Therefore, both sides temporarily put down most of their vigilance. After the coronation, His Majesty and Mellad began to reorganize the temple as quickly as possible. This was the bargaining chip they used to trade with the Vatican in Eastern Europe. After chaos, the head knight of the Knights Templar had died in the hands of Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe. The Knights Templar had been in a leaderless state. However, as the spokesperson of the Vatican in the Dark World, the foundation of the Knights Templar was extremely strong. It could be said that it had the structure of a true superpower. Mellad had lost some things in the process of taking over, but he had taken over nearly 70% of the entire Knights Templar. Today, the Knights Templar could almost be said to have broken away from the Vatican and become a close ally of the Vatican. It could be said that it had become a close ally of the Vatican. Mellad's strength was higher than that of chaos. With His Majesty, although the size of the Knights Templar was a little small, it was no worse than in its heyday. When the undercurrent of the Dark World was surging, no one noticed that an undercurrent lurking around Italos had completely taken shape. It had become a brand new superpower, lurking in the Dark World. Although half a year was not a long time, Mellad had been the vice commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps before. It was not difficult for him to take over the Knights Templar. During this period of time, it was enough for him to win people's hearts and stabilize the foundation. After the internal situation stabilized, the next step was naturally to expand outwards. The brand new Knights Templar needed a real high-profile appearance to tell the whole Dark World of their existence. Mellad had been looking forward to it, but he didn't expect that this appearance would be aimed at the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai. Mellad didn't panic, but he was really a little nervous. But His Majesty and Wang Qinglei had always had a cooperative relationship. Wang Qinglei wanted to give a big gift to the Xianxia State Parliament. His Majesty was the most powerful force he could borrow. "Prepare more people," His Majesty said slowly. "Wang Qinglei should contact me in the near future. Let the people you have prepared now go to East Island to hide and find an opportunity to test them first." Mellad was stunned, then nodded and agreed. 6 commanders of knights, 12 grand knights, and 200 Knights Templar. The lineup he had prepared was strong enough, especially in the Dark World, where there was an extreme shortage of invincible realm experts. This was a power that could turn the world upside down wherever they went. Knights Templar was the foundation of a superpower. The commander of Knights Templar must be an invincible realm expert. And the weakest of the 12 commanders of knights was an expert at the peak of the Thundershocking realm or a half-step invincible realm. The Grand Knights were required to be in the Thundershocking realm. The Knights Templar were the elites of Knights Templar. The Fire-Flaming realm was the foundation, and there were also experts in the Thundershocking realm leading the team. If these forces fought with the Wang family of Beihai, they naturally couldn't win. But their task wasn't to fight. What they needed to do was to put enough pressure on Mount Dibing. When the pressure reached a certain level, the support of Xianxia state would arrive as scheduled. At that time, they could take advantage of the situation to retreat. At that time, Xianxia state would have enough reasons to start intervening in the internal affairs of the Wang family of Beihai. Of course, Xianxia state also needed to complete all this through Wang Qinglei, which was equivalent to improving Wang Qinglei's status in Beihai province in a disguised form. "Mellad," His Majesty suddenly said, "Tell me, what do we need to be worthy of what we are paying now?" Mellad narrowed his eyes, and there was some excitement in his eyes. Wang Qinglei needed to borrow power, and Knights Templar needed to bleed. Since it was cooperation, Wang Qinglei definitely needed to give enough compensation. There were too many things they needed in the huge Wang family of Beihai. "How about a team?" Mellad said with some excitement. The glorious team of Knights Templar was one of the things he lost when he integrated Knights Templar. It belonged to the core power of the Vatican. Since Knights Templar no longer belonged to the Vatican, the Pope naturally had to take this part of the power back. Mellad had always been envious of this. The Wang family of Beihai has more than one team. Mellad chuckled and said, "Their team is equipped with the world's most advanced fighter jets, which can enhance our strength." "It's too petty." His Majesty thought for a moment and said quietly. Mellad froze for a moment and said cautiously, "What do you want, Your Majesty?" His Majesty was silent for a moment and laughed. "I want something he can afford to give, but he absolutely doesn't want to give." Chapter 773. Mellad didn't know what it was that Wang Qinglei could afford to give but absolutely didn't want to give. At the very least, it wouldn't be a team. Every superpower had its own team. To put it bluntly, the team was the air power of a superpower. A standard team had 12 fighter jets, 5 armed helicopters, 2 transport planes, and an air refueling aircraft. According to different situations, when fighting at close range from the base camp, the team would be equipped with missile arrays, luxuriously equipped with stealth reconnaissance aircraft, and so on. These big toys were very precious trump cards in the hands of any superpower. But for the Wang family of Beihai, this was definitely not something that could hurt them. The medium-sized aircraft carrier owned by the Beihai Corps was enough to provide countless possibilities for their tactics in the state of war. Therefore, when the superpowers only had 1 or 2 teams, the Wang family of Beihai had a team group, which was not a number that could be included in 1 or 2 teams at all. If it wasn't a team, then what did His Majesty want? Mellad was silent for a while. Just as he was about to speak, the doorbell suddenly rang. His Majesty waved his hand. Mellad walked over and opened the door of the dormitory. Outside the door, a beautiful woman with an extremely numb expression stood there, holding a tray in her hand. "Dear Dr. Murphy, I hope you can let me hear the good news I want to hear." His Majesty laughed with some pleasure. Murphy's face suddenly turned pale for a moment. He bit his lip tightly and said in a dry voice, "The antidote is still being studied." His Majesty said calmly, "Do you have a direction?" "Yes, but we are still trying. This kind of toxin is very terrible. We can barely suppress its toxin now, but we can't find a solution for the time being." Murphy's voice was a little bitter and anxious. "The last time I came here, you told me the same thing. I'm a little disappointed." His Majesty said blandly, "No, it's different from last time." Dr. Murphy trembled. "This time, the medicine is more effective than the last time. Your Majesty, I'm really working hard. All right, Murphy. His Majesty waved his hand. You're too nervous. I believe you're working hard enough, but your progress is still too slow. I hope you can remember that your daughter also has this kind of toxin in her body. I can still barely hold on, but your lovely daughter doesn't have much time left. Do you understand? Murphy lowered his voice. He lowered his head, and a look of extreme hatred and fear flashed in his eyes. She took 2 steps forward with the tray and said softly, I understand. His Majesty stretched out his arm, revealing his veins. On the tray was a syringe and a tube of transparent, colorless medicine. Murphy took the syringe and carefully injected the medicine into His Majesty's body. During the whole process, Mellad stood next to His Majesty. He narrowed his eyes and stared at Murphy's every move. His Majesty closed his eyes. As the drug was injected, his body became more and more stiff. Finally, his body completely solidified on the chair. He did not breathe, and even his heart seemed to have stopped beating. Mellad did not say anything. Murphy waited quietly. After some time, His Majesty's body trembled and he let out a long sigh. The cloud of starlight that enveloped him began to circulate continuously, and the traces became more and more natural. Even its scale seemed to have expanded a lot. Mellad slowly relaxed and looked at the starry clouds around His Majesty. There was some awe in his eyes. As an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, he naturally knew what this starlight cloud was. This was a domain. It was not a pseudo-domain. It was a domain that was truly flawless and had even surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. The perfection of the domain also represented His Majesty's true realm. However, unlike the super experts who had really surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, His Majesty's domain could only be maintained in a very small space for some reason. This was undoubtedly His Majesty's biggest weakness. His Majesty slowly stood up, moved his body, and sighed comfortably. Go, Murphy. You have 2 hours to spend with your husband and daughter. His Majesty said softly. Murphy bowed deeply and couldn't wait to turn around and leave the dormitory of the laboratory. The door was closed again. His Majesty slowly moved his body and adapted to the strange power. His movements were very slow, but the space of the entire dormitory was slightly distorted as he moved slowly. Mellad. He suddenly spoke in a soft voice. Your Majesty. Mellad took a step forward. His Majesty laughed. After the next injection, maybe my strength will be close to your current level. Your Majesty is too modest, even now, merely. Even now, Mellad is no match for you. Mellad's voice was very respectful, and it came from the bottom of his heart. His Majesty's strength at his peak had completely surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Although he was not really supreme, seriously speaking, his strength should be a little stronger than that of Lin Fengting and Li Guangtu in Eastern Europe. He could not compare with Wang Tianzong in the end day of Mormons, but compared with Wang Tianzong before Mormons, he should be on par with him. With such strength, once the domain or sword energy was expanded, it would be enough to cover a distance of 10,000 meters in an instant. His Majesty could not do this now. His domain could only reach its peak within a distance of a few meters around him. But this was not because his strength was not enough, but because of his body. Even if Mellad was close to the peak of the invincible realm now, if he fought with His Majesty in close combat within a distance of a few meters, he would definitely not be a match for His Majesty. Of course, he was not a match for His Majesty in close combat. If he wanted to leave, His Majesty's domain was too small and could not keep him. His Majesty glanced at him and touched Mellad's head with a smile. Mellad maintained his bent posture and lowered his head. These shackles, His Majesty sighed and said, I've been carrying them for too long. Dr. Murphy still has some strength. I believe that she can develop an antidote as soon as possible. As long as the poison in Your Majesty's body is removed and Your Majesty returns to the peak, we will be the #1 force in the dark world. Mellad said respectfully. There's not much time left. His Majesty said softly, Li Tianlan won't give me too much time, and neither will Wang Tianzong. Before Li Tianlan reaches the peak of the invincible realm and before Wang Tianzong recovers from his injury, I must find a way. There must be a way, Mellad said in a deep voice. Of course. His Majesty smiled and narrowed his eyes. As long as he could recover to his peak state before that, with his strength at his peak, he should be able to try to break into the desert prison. Under the suppression of the intensive firepower of the desert prison, he would kill Li Tianlan at the risk of being seriously injured. Then it would be Wang Tianzong. Once the two of them died, he would no longer have any scruples in this era. His Majesty closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It seemed that every cell in his body was carrying a kind of eager power. The communication video suddenly rang. Mellad turned his head and took a look. He raised his eyebrows slightly and said, "Your Majesty, it's Wang Qinglei's communication." Chapter 774. Mellad left the room. The communication from afar had been connected, and Wang Qinglei's figure appeared on the screen. His clothes were neat, and his expression was calm and dignified. His Majesty, who was wrapped in starlight clouds and mist, looked at the screen quietly. They were silent for a long time. Wang Tonglu has been transferred away. After an unknown period of time, Wang Qinglei slowly opened his mouth, his voice indifferent. "Congratulations," His Majesty said with a chuckle. The last heavyweight in Wuyue who was qualified to resist Wang Qinglei left Wuyue dejectedly. The most developed province in Zhongzhou State had now completely fallen into Wang Qinglei's hands. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Wang Qinglei could go further next year, even if he could not reach the top in the end, a new group would have taken shape. With the foundation of Wuyue, it could completely support the continuous development of a new group. This was indeed worthy of congratulation. But the premise was that Wang Qinglei could really improve next year. Wang Qinglei took a deep look at His Majesty and suddenly asked, "Who are you?" This problem had been plaguing him for too long. The cooperation between the two had been going on for a long time. He almost watched the other party turn from an ordinary person with nothing into a giant who could really stand at the peak of the dark world. The cooperation between the two was very obscure, and every time His Majesty made a move, he had a very clear purpose. It turned out that almost all of his plans were successful, so he had more and more chips in his hands. In his eyes, the dark world seemed to be like a chessboard. He kept putting chess pieces on the chessboard, looking careful but inexplicable. The chaos in Eastern Europe became the most critical step. He did not plot against those Invincible Realm experts, but after a large number of Invincible Realm experts died, he successfully got Knights Templar. All the accumulation was completely transformed at that moment, allowing him to reach the peak of the dark world in one fell swoop. Wang Qinglei didn't know if His Majesty had any other bargaining chips, but at this moment, in his heart, His Majesty was almost the strongest person in the dark world. Whether it was his personal strength or the power he held in his hands. The other party definitely had more than just temple. In fact, the temple was only a part of their strength that they had purposely revealed. If Wang Qinglei did not know his true identity, he would not have dared to cooperate with him. This was also the main reason why he had hesitated to contact the other party until now. "Is it important?" His Majesty chuckled. His voice was very gentle, as if he would never be impatient. "Very important." Wang Qinglei nodded seriously and said in a deep voice, "No, I think it's more important if you can improve next year." His Majesty said with a smile. Wang Qinglei fell silent. Relatively speaking, this was indeed the most important matter. The attitude of the academics and the prince group to support him was extremely obvious. Wu Yu had been transferred frequently in the past 6 months, and it was almost clear. When the Southeast group reshuffled internally, the first one they thought of was Wuyue. They also hoped that Wang Qinglei would be alone in Wuyue. That was the most dangerous period for Wang Qinglei. He went to Yuzhou to meet Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing to express his attitude. In the end, the two groups joined hands to withstand the pressure of the Southeast group. At the same time, they also made a lot of concessions. The premise of the Southeast group's smooth shuffle was to give up Wuyue. Now, Wang Qinglei could be said to have his own base camp, and all of this came from the support of the academics and the prince group. In other words, at this time next year, Even if he could go further, he would still be the leader of the Southeast group in name, but in fact, he could already be said to be a member of the academics and the prince group. And the two groups gave him such great support, Wang Qinglei must give something in return. Although a director was important, compared to the Southeast group, it was not particularly important. Therefore, the academics and the prince group could accept Wang Qinglei swinging between them because their current interests were the same, which was to take over the Southeast group. After they divided up the Southeast group, it was estimated that Wang Qinglei would retire at that time. Naturally, there was no need to worry about these things. Wang Xianxia had made it clear that he would never compromise. Therefore, after weighing the pros and cons, Xianxia state could only strive to break through their position from the inside. Wang Qinglei was the most suitable candidate. Therefore, everyone was very clear that Wang Tonglu's transfer meant that Wang Qinglei completely controlled Wuxia. And after having his own base, Wang Qinglei must take action against the Wang family of Beihai, put pressure on Beihai from the inside, and even create a real breakthrough for Xianxia state. The first person Wang Qinglei thought of was His Majesty. What do you want? Wang Qinglei took a deep breath and temporarily stopped thinking about His Majesty's identity. His identity. Since it was cooperation, he must give His Majesty something. After all, the other party was not obliged to help. Ah! His Majesty smiled and said, I should say, what do you need me to do now, so that I can make a price, right? Attack Beihai province. Wang Qinglei said calmly, invade from all sides, make Beihai province completely chaotic, spread rumors, reduce the control of Mount Dibing over the people of Beihai, weaken the combat capability of the Beihai Corps, and get the technology of Mount Dibing. I only have one requirement, chaos. He paused and said seriously, the more chaotic, the better. Do you want Wang Xianxia to take the initiative to ask for help from Xianxia state when he can't hold on? His Majesty's tone was playful. Wang Qinglei did not speak. In fact, Wang Xianxiao's attitude was not within his consideration. After all, Beihai was a part of Xianxia state. When Beihai province was chaotic to a certain extent, Xianxia state could take the initiative to intervene in the affairs of Beihai. It was useless even if Wang Xianxia disagreed. Last time Xianxia state forced the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Xianxia could react violently. This time Beihai was in internal chaos, and Xianxia state took the initiative to help. Would Wang Xianxia dare to react violently? If he dared to do so, it would be treason. Can you do it? Wang Qinglei asked calmly. His Majesty was silent for about a minute. 4 invincible realm experts, 40 thundershocking realm experts, and more than 500 fire-flaming realm experts. His voice slowly sounded across the screen, like a bloody storm. This is a conservative estimate. Do you think it's enough? 4 invincible realm experts. How many invincible realm experts were there in the entire Dark World now? Wang Qinglei's heart suddenly shook, and his face looked a little pale. This kind of lineup, it was not a question of whether it was enough or not, but how much did he have to pay if the other side sent out such a lineup? What do you want? Wang Qinglei asked again. What do you want to give me? His Majesty asked back. Wang Qinglei looked at the screen expressionlessly and said nothing. His Majesty chuckled, looked at the screen, and said calmly, I want Beihai. Or Kunlun City. Choose one of the two. Which one will you choose? Or, how will the Parliament choose? Chapter 775. Wang Qinglei didn't speak for a long time. He stood in front of the screen, and his firm and calm expression was like a rock, but the obvious rise and fall of his breath still revealed his mood. He even thought he had heard wrong. Beihai, Kunlun City. Choose one of the two? This was simply the most absurd request he had ever heard, and it was also the most naked ambition he had ever seen. His Majesty sat down on a reclining chair opposite the screen and slowly leaned against the back of the chair. The chair shook slightly and made a slight sound. His fingers unconsciously tapped the armrest of the chair, and his voice was neither arrogant nor impatient. How should I choose? Are you crazy? Wang Qinglei said incredulously. His Majesty laughed, and the starlight cloud floated slightly around him. His voice sounded a little indifferent. Likewise. You want to reach the top after leaving the southeast group. I want Beihai or Kunlun City. What's the difference? Do you know what you're talking about? Wang Qinglei suppressed his anger and asked word by word. He was indeed shocked by His Majesty's strength. 4 invincible realm experts and dozens of thunder-shocking realm experts. Not to mention now, even before Eastern Europe, this kind of lineup was not something that any force could come up with. No, strictly speaking, no force could come up with so many experts, including the Wang family of Beihai. Before Eastern Europe, the Wang family of Beihai only had one invincible realm expert, Wang Tianzong. Even if Heaven's Saber DK was counted, there were only 2 of them. Of course, these 2 people had the strength to kill all 4 invincible realm experts, but this did not mean that invincible realm experts were cabbages. Now that all the experts at the peak of the invincible realm were silent, there were less than 10 people in the entire Dark World with peak combat capability, including several newly promoted invincible realm experts. His Majesty could mobilize 4 of them. This number might include himself, but it was enough to shock people. But Wang Qinglei was more shocked by the other party's appetite. You want Beihai, but it's better to be in our hands than in your hands. What the parliament wants is Beihai. Where do you get the courage to snatch things from the parliament of Zhongzhou State? Wang Qinglei said in disbelief. The game between the parliament of Zhongzhou State and the Wang family of Beihai could be said to be fruitful at present. But strictly speaking, even if they lost Wuxia, the Wang family of Beihai would not really suffer a serious injury. The game between the 2 sides was destined to be a very long process. 10 years, 20 years, or even longer. Everyone involved in it was prepared to fight a protracted war. The most important reason was the Wang family of Beihai, or the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. His Majesty actually wanted the North Sea. Not to mention how likely it was, even if he really got Beihai, how could he face Zhongzhou State? The current game was only an internal problem of Zhongzhou State, so it needed to be discussed, compromised, and balanced. If a foreign force like His Majesty occupied Beihai, it would be an invasion. There was no game at all. Zhongzhou State did not need to hesitate at all and would directly send troops to destroy everything His Majesty had. 4 invincible realm experts were indeed terrible, but in the face of the most powerful hegemon country in the world, even if you had 40 invincible realm experts, what could you do? You want to enter Mount Dibbing? Wang Qinglei's expression was completely cold. He did not know if His Majesty was crazy, but even if he was, he would not agree to this condition. Kunlun City. One was the territory that Zhongzhou State wanted to completely control the most, and the other was the Special Warfare Center of Zhongzhou State. He would not choose either, and he could not choose either. Don't get me wrong. His Majesty smiled and said, I'm just talking about Beihai, not Mount Dibbing. It's Beihai in history. Beihai in history. Wang Qinglei's eyes narrowed, and he finally understood the other party's intention. The so-called history of the other party had never been recognized by Beihai province, but this history was not strange at all, because people often mentioned it. And it was not a person who often mentioned this history, but a country. East Island. Beihai in their eyes was completely in the past. It was the North Island that once belonged to them hundreds of years ago. In the territory of Beihai province today, it was the south of Kanglin River. The areas of Kanglin, Tongtian, and Qiushui occupied half of the area of Beihai province. What His Majesty wanted was precisely this half of the North Sea province. Wang Qinglei's expression was cold. He had cooperated with His Majesty several times, and they had always been very happy. But this time, His Majesty's appetite was completely beyond his expectation. He did want to reach the top in Zhongzhou State, and he also wanted to take the position of the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, but it did not mean that he could tolerate the other party's bottomless destruction of Beihai. That was his Beihai province. He could cooperate with His Majesty to make him go to Beihai to cause chaos, and he could also work with the academics and the prince group to break up the current Beihai. That was because he knew that after he reached the top, he could reverse the situation and reach an agreement with Zhongzhou State again. Now, if he gave half of Beihai to the other party, he would be the eternal sinner of the Wang family of Beihai. He wanted to be the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. How could he be willing to see Beihai divided in his hands? I don't want to. Wang Qinglei's voice was cold. He would rather give up this cooperation than answer. His Majesty's condition. As for the Kunlun city that the other party wanted, that was not something he could decide. I'm afraid it's not up to you. His Majesty said slowly. Don't forget, this is Zhongzhou State. Wang Qinglei said coldly. But it's not your Zhongzhou State yet. His Majesty's tone did not fluctuate at all. I can bypass you and talk to Zhongzhou State. What do you think they will choose? Why do you think Zhongzhou State will agree to you? Wang Qinglei sneered and said, this is the territory of Zhongzhou State. I'm also from Zhongzhou State. His Majesty said blandly, if I control Beihai, I will form a closer relationship with Zhongzhou State. I know what I want, what I can rely on, and what I can bring to Zhongzhou State. Why won't Zhongzhou State agree? Everyone is plotting Beihai. After they succeed, they also need someone to manage it. I'm from Zhongzhou State, not some foreign force. My force can naturally be called the force of Zhongzhou State. After I take Beihai and divide the Beihai province, I can withstand the pressure of Mount Dibing and make the two groups more relaxed. Why won't they agree? His Majesty smiled and continued, the most important thing is that I will be more obedient than the Wang family of Beihai. My Beihai is a part of Zhongzhou State, a part that really belongs to Zhongzhou State. Wang Qinglei's face twisted and became more and more ugly. Zhongzhou State can't trust you at all. Trust takes time, but cooperation only needs benefits. So far, I haven't done anything wrong to Zhongzhou State. As a Zhongzhou State person, as long as there is a basis for cooperation, Zhongzhou State can naturally see my position clearly. His Majesty said calmly, at present, Zhongzhou State seems to lack a dark force that specializes in overseas affairs. Kunlun City is no longer useful. Li Tianlan's future is in Tianan. As long as the parliament allows me to expand in the name of Zhongzhou State, I can bring unimaginable benefits to Zhongzhou State. Wang Qinglei was completely silent. He knew very well that as long as His Majesty was sincere, Zhongzhou State would not refuse such cooperation, and there was no reason to refuse. In front of the screen, he lit a cigarette. After smoking most of it, he said in a hoarse voice, in that case, what do you still want from me? His Majesty looked at him for a long time, then said with a smile, in fact, it was you who asked me. Wang Qinglei, I will communicate with Zhongzhou State. His Majesty's voice was gentle. But for the sake of you taking the initiative to find me, I can give you a chance. After I take Beihai, you can exchange Kunlun City with me. Chapter 776. Life in the desert prison was like stagnant water, boring and repetitive. There was nothing new, only new stories. The story came from Zhou Tong. It was about his experience in most of his life. Li Tianlan's life was still the same. He meditated every day, thinking about how to enter the invincible realm. But there was one more thing in his leisure time, which was to chat with Zhou Tong. Li Tianlan regarded it as a class. And Zhou Tong regarded it as a memory of his life. His life in his 70s could be said to be magnificent. Deep in the prison, he could still make his family a core part of the prince group. This old man really had too many stories and too much experience. Li Tianlan was very young. So what he lacked most was experience. Looking at the future, the rise of Emperor Dong's palace was almost unstoppable, so Li Tianlan had to learn how to be a qualified leader. Zhou Tong was the best teacher. He didn't have to teach Li Tianlan specific means, but he used to be in a high enough position to teach Li Tianlan what to do when standing at the top, what kind of mind and vision he should have. Zhou Tong was not the only person that Li Tianlan planned to bring out of the desert prison. There were 9 people on the list that Qin Weibai had sorted out, and Zhou Tong was just one of them. Li Tianlan recently paid attention to the status of the 9 people. 2 of them were dead, and 2 of them had become a little delirious. Li Tianlan observed the last one. After learning about his past through Xiao Mahai, he finally decided that he was not trustworthy, or in other words, he did not have the conditions that he could use with confidence. In this way, There were only 4 people on the list in his hand. Zhou Tong was one. The other was a Chinese from Annan State. Before entering the prison, he was the head of a large intelligence organization. The intelligence coverage covered more than half of Southeast Asia and Zhongzhou State. At its peak, it even extended its tentacles to Snow Country. It had been nearly 10 years since he was arrested in Zhongzhou State for selling intelligence of Zhongzhou State. The other 2 were second to none financial tycoons in Zhongzhou State before entering the prison, but they eventually became the stepping stones of the Flourishing Age Fund. It could even be said that they were the most important stepping stones since the rise of the Flourishing Age Fund. When they were driven to desperation by Han Donglu, they secretly accepted the capital injection of overseas consortiums and signed a series of agreements full of insider information. One of them was arrested, and the other surrendered. It had been nearly 10 years since they were in prison. Li Tianlan didn't need any super masters in martial arts. Nowadays, there were at least 30 Thundershocking Realm masters locked up in the desert prison, and the worst one was close to the peak of the Thundershocking Realm. But Li Tianlan couldn't afford to use this group of people at all. They were either the regional heads of a large force or the ace agents of a country. They were different from the people on Li Tianlan's list. Not to mention Zhou Tong, even the head of the intelligence agency was neutral before entering the prison. After so many years, their value had basically been squeezed out, and such people were not indispensable in relatively mature forces. Under the right opportunity, Li Tianlan could take them out and it wouldn't touch the nerves of the parliament of Zhongzhou State. The identity of those ace agents was too sensitive. Even if they had been locked up for many years, Li Tianlan didn't think he could change their stand. The most important thing was that although they were strong, their potential had long been exhausted after being locked up for many years. They weren't worth investing in. As for those who had just come in, they were even less trustworthy. Such people were of little value to Li Tianlan. The current lineup of Emperor Dong's palace was enough to support their expansion. What Li Tianlan needed the most now were these masters who were difficult to completely control. Zhou Tong's class time was about 3 hours a day. After that, Li Tianlan would chat with the other 3 people. The person in charge of the intelligence organization, codenamed Mr. Black, was the focus of his attention recently. Emperor Dong's palace now had its own intelligence organization. But because it had been established for a short time, although it didn't lack resources, it was still a little stiff in operation. Therefore, Mr. Black had already made contact with Xianyuan City and contacted the outside world. When Li Tianlan walked into Mr. Black's dormitory, Mr. Black just hung up the video call from Xianyuan City. When he saw Li Tianlan, he was stunned. Then he stood up and said respectfully, "Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded. "What are you busy with today?" "I'm studying the current topographic map and future planning of Xianyuan City." Mr. Black said with a smile, "I've recently learned about the situation in Tianan. Xianyuan City's development prospects are very good. Your Highness wants to set up an intelligence organization. Personally, I think it's secondary to get intelligence on the other side. The first thing we need to do is to make sure we don't lose our own intelligence. Xianyuan City is our base camp. We should be able to see even the slightest movement in Xianyuan City." "Come on," Li Tianlan said slowly. Now the intelligence agency of Emperor Dong's palace was controlled by Tian Yin, who had left the purgatory of Heaven Capital. As an old man of the Li family and an old man that Li Tianlan was very familiar with, Li Tianlan never doubted him. Mr. Black nodded. He hesitated for a moment and said softly, "Your Highness, I should be able to find some people from Dark Pupil after I get out. They are also very familiar with Southeast Asia. I don't know if Your Highness needs them. If you do, I can let them join Emperor Dong's palace." The intelligence organization that Mr. He had founded was called the Dark Eye. At its peak, the Dark Eye was a famous intelligence organization in the entire Dark World. After Mr. He was captured, the Dark Eye fell apart, but there were always some experienced backbones who remained loyal to him. No matter how many of them there were, they could increase the intelligence power of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan said, "Let's talk about it later." He slowly turned around and left Mr. Black's room. The other two financial giants were studying the current financial situation. Li Tianlan stopped in front of their door, but he didn't go in. He walked to the gate of the prison. The gate opened slowly. It was dusk in the desert. The light of the setting sun shone on the yellow sand of the desert. It was silent and desolate. Li Tianlan walked to the gate and sat down. He looked at the sky in the distance and said nothing. Only the dark and exquisite Xianxia sword was slowly rotating around him. Li Tianlan was like a statue. He would come here every day to sit for a while, but what he saw was always the yellow sand and the setting sun. The sun slowly set. Darkness shrouded the desert, and the temperature began to drop. "Your Highness." A clear voice sounded beside Li Tianlan. A touch of delicate fragrance appeared beside Li Tianlan. Xiao Qing, who was brought to the desert prison by her father, Xiao Mahai, before she graduated, quietly sat down beside Li Tianlan. She wore a very pure white dress, and her snow-white calf leaned against Li Tianlan's leg intentionally or unintentionally. Li Tianlan didn't move. He just said yes. "Are you waiting for someone?" Xiao Qing asked carefully. She sat close to Li Tianlan and stared at his side profile. A very attractive blush appeared on the face of the girl who had just turned 20. Li Tianlan shook his head. Xiao Qing thought about it and lit a cigarette for him. She looked at Li Tianlan with a lighter in one hand and her cheek in the other. She whispered, "You look very lonely." "I'm not lonely," Li Tianlan said faintly, "just a little lonely." He looked at the sky in the distance. It was the night and the stars. At night in the desert, heaven and earth seemed to be frozen, without any vitality. Xiao Qing's face became redder. Her voice trembled with a touch of temptation. "Your Highness, I can accompany you tonight." Li Tianlan glanced at her, shook his head, and said, "Let's go eat." Chapter 777. It rarely rained in the desert. The temperature in the prison was slightly lower than usual. Unlike the outside world, raindrops fell from the sky. Most of the raindrops evaporated before they hit the ground. Water vapor drifted in the air, and only a few raindrops fell on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan sat quietly in front of the desert prison, looking at the distant sky. His heart was as still as water, motionless. When disappointment had become the norm, all the emotions in his heart seemed to gradually turn into numb silence. The sky gradually darkened. The vast expanse of water vapor rose in the air. The darkness swallowed his figure in the night. Li Tianlan reached out and picked up the Xianxia sword spinning around him. He reached out and rubbed the delicate blade, his eyes as quiet as the starry sky in the desert. He would sit in front of the prison gate every day for more than a month. At this time, Xiao Mahai, as the warden, would quietly guard near Li Tianlan. Sometimes he would stand for hours or even half a day. He always felt that Li Tianlan was waiting for something. But for more than a month, there was no response from his waiting. Xiao Mahai could not feel Li Tianlan's anger and disappointment, but he could clearly sense that Li Tianlan was getting quieter and quieter, as if he had completely suppressed all his emotions in his heart. The twilight on the horizon disappeared completely. Darkness enveloped the desert. The light in front of the prison gate lit up. Li Tianlan sat on the edge of the light, with his back to Xiao Mahai. His shadow was long in the light, looking lonely and cold. Xiao Mahai looked at his watch and hesitated. Finally, he couldn't help but walk over and whispered, "Your Highness, are you waiting for someone?" Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at the Xianxia sword running between his fingers. His voice was as calm as water. Xiao Mahai gave a hollow laugh. Li Tianlan had been here for more than a year, but Xiao Mahai did not establish a close relationship with him. Instead, he was more in awe of Li Tianlan. Because he had not figured out Li Tianlan's temper, he was naturally more cautious when getting along with him. He looked at the distant sky and whispered, "Then, shall we go eat first?" "I'm not hungry." Li Tianlan did not look up. "Old Zhou made a few new dishes today. Your Highness should like them." "No." Li Tianlan stood up and loosened his palm. The Xianxia sword rotated slowly around him, like a planet around a star. "I'm going out for a walk," Li Tianlan said. Xiao Mahai was stunned and didn't come back to his senses for a while. "Go for a walk?" In more than a year, the furthest he had walked was the distance from his dormitory to the prison gate. He had never left the confines of the prison. This was the first time he said he wanted to go out for a walk. By the time Xiao Mahai came to his senses, Li Tianlan had already walked more than 10 meters away. He hesitated for a moment and didn't say anything. He just sighed softly. He still didn't notice Li Tianlan's anger and disappointment. But he could feel that Li Tianlan was in a bad mood. "Dad, where is His Highness going?" Xiao Qing trotted over and asked. "Your Highness is not in a good mood. Let's go for a walk." Xiao Mahai shook his head. "Inform the kitchen to prepare a few dishes that His Highness likes. When he comes back, quickly make another portion." "Oh," Xiao Qing said, watching his back getting farther and farther away. A gust of wind blew in the desert at night. The rain stopped. Water vapor slowly floated all over the sky. As Li Tianlan walked, there seemed to be a thin layer of mist between heaven and earth, vague and indifferent. This picture was very beautiful. Xiao Qing's eyes were a little obsessed. The light behind him faded away and eventually disappeared completely. The white mist full of vitality floated densely, but it didn't affect Li Tianlan's sight at all. The seemingly illusory white mist blocked the yellow sand that was blown up by the wind. Between heaven and earth, there was silence, and desolation. Loneliness and boredom seemed to go deep into the bone. Li Tianlan walked forward quietly, with no expression on his face. He didn't know where he was going, nor what he wanted to do. The depression in his heart had changed from the initial torrent to the deep sea, constantly fluctuating in his heart, and even destroying his state of concentration more than once. In more than half a year, his sleep time was getting less and less. The deep meditation on weekdays had almost completely replaced his sleeping time. His will was constantly condensing in meditation, and his swordsmanship was also advancing by leaps and bounds. This kind of practice could hardly be said to be painstaking, but even desperate. No one knew why. Li Tianlan never told anyone that he had dreamed of Qin Weibai countless times in the past 6 months. At first, it was the bits and pieces of their acquaintance. The continuous dreams were long and clear. From the first acquaintance to knowing each other, to the promise to keep each other. Everything, every picture, every word, and every look were constantly repeated in the dream. That figure had really gone deep into the soul, and then began to extend in different directions in the facts of the dream. He dreamed of growing old with Qin Weibai. He dreamed of falling out with Qin Weibai. He dreamed of parting with Qin Weibai. Countless dreams. He would meet many people in the dream, and finally, all of them became Qin Weibai. He dreamed that Qin Weibai gave birth to a son for him. The dream changed, and the son became a daughter. He dreamed that Qin Weibai stood at the top and looked down at the heroes in the world. He dreamed that he passed by Qin Weibai countless times and finally became strangers. In the dream, he ignored Qin Weibai's struggle and curses, tearing her clothes. On a snowy night, in the vast world of ice and snow, the bright sword blade pierced into his chest. Chaos. Every dream was extremely clear. Every dream had a different ending. The yearning turned into longing, surging up like a tide. Li Tianlan wanted to ask, but he wanted to see Qin Weibai. He wanted to ask why he couldn't see her. He didn't think there was anything wrong between them. The last time they met, there was no anger or quarrel between them. There was no then. He had called her, but every time, it was Horsewoman who answered the phone. Horsewoman either said she was busy or she was not there. Li Tianlan forgot how many times he had called. But Qin Weibai never responded. Gradually, Li Tianlan also fell silent. For more than a year, the man and woman who used to love each other didn't contact each other even once. He had asked the military counselor this question before. But more than a month later, there was still no answer. He was indeed waiting for someone. But for more than a month, he seemed to be waiting for someone who couldn't wait. Why on earth? Li Tianlan stopped and sat down in the desert. He raised his head and looked at the sky. There was no light in the desert. The shining galaxy above the sky was incomparably bright. Li Tianlan was in a daze. He wrote the 3 words, Qin Weibai, on the yellow sand with his finger. Recalling the bits and pieces of the two of them together, he became more and more silent. Time was passing. The darkness was passing. The desert was silent. It seemed that he was the only one left in the world. The past seemed to have really become the past rooted in his memory. Li Tianlan smiled. He didn't know why, but he just wanted to laugh. I've seen the rainstorm sweep the desert. I've seen the galaxy cover the moonlight. I've seen the dusk chase the dawn. I want to see you, but I can't see you. Why? Li Tianlan gently tapped the Xianyuan sword. Why do you think? The delicate blade of the Xianyuan sword swayed slightly in front of Li Tianlan, as if shaking its head. I'm not happy, Li Tianlan said lightly. The Xianyuan sword circled around Li Tianlan, as if thinking. Its exquisite blade suddenly trembled. A subtle but extremely sharp sword energy appeared in the yellow sand, sweeping away a large area of white fog. At this moment, Li Tianlan clearly sensed a complex and obscure will. It seemed to be a test, but also an inquiry. The Xianyuan sword was eager to have a try. Li Tianlan froze for a moment and laughed. He nodded. The Xianyuan sword suddenly let out a sword cry. In an instant, the violent sword energy burst out from its delicate blade. At this moment, the desert was no longer lonely. Above the yellow sand, there was soaring fighting intent everywhere. Li Tianlan slowly stood up, looked at the constantly shaking Xianyuan sword, and said calmly, "Make your move." Chapter 778. As the core of the 13th floor, Xianyuan sword was a weapon, but it was a real weapon with its own life. It had its own thoughts and emotions, and the energy it absorbed on a daily basis could be regarded as its vitality. That kind of thinking could be transmitted through the sword intent. Although it couldn't speak, it could always carry out simple communication with Li Tianlan. The sword was cold. It couldn't comfort people. Or the only comfort it could give Li Tianlan was fighting. After swallowing the 4 murderous weapons, the sword energy of Xianyuan's sword became more majestic and agile. It could be said to be Li Tianlan's best opponent. This was also the road to the invincible realm that Li Tianlan had prepared for himself. Because Xianyuan's sword was a life, but it was also a sword. It was pure enough, so its sword energy was perfect and truly balanced. In other words, with Li Tianlan's current physical state, if Xianyuan's sword broke out with all its strength, it was enough to beat Li Tianlan. You are unhappy, lonely, and cold. That's not a problem. I've beaten you once. Why do you still think about those messy things? If one time is not enough, then do it again. That was the idea of Xianyuan's sword. The energy of the 4 murderous weapons was continuously instilled into Xianyuan's sword and transformed into sword energy. Dongqing Wujin consciously strengthened the speed of filling energy for Xianyuan's sword. In this state, Xianyuan's sword could completely press Li Tianlan to the ground and rub him as much as it wanted. Li Tianlan's body straightened. The white mist around him surged wildly and was quickly absorbed by his body. He reached out to Xianyuan's sword. Boom! A roar suddenly broke out in the silent desert. The dark night was almost completely illuminated in an instant. The delicate blade of Xianyuan's sword continued to expand and became a big sword more than 2 meters high. The sword energy flew and rotated, directly enveloping Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan suddenly clenched his fists. The flying yellow sand quickly gathered in the violent sword intent and converged into an extremely slender long sword. Sand gathered into a sword. Li Tianlan held the hilt. The sword energy exploded. In the harsh buzzing sound, his figure disappeared for a moment, and when he reappeared, he was directly in front of Xianyuan's sword. The frenzied sword light soared into the sky. The dazzling light dispelled the night in an instant. The Xianyuan sword rose into the sky, and countless sword chi swirled wildly, turning into a tornado. The tornado completely enveloped Li Tianlan, and the sword chi kept falling from all directions. The sand sword in Li Tianlan's hand was directly smashed by the sword energy. Circumference number in the blink of an eye, the space within 100 meters boiled. Sand and pebbles flew everywhere. Everything in the surroundings was occupied by the sword chi. Without a sword in his hand, Li Tianlan made a gesture with both hands. Myriad limitless seal. The amazing destructive power was still condensing, and the Xianyuan sword in the air had already fallen straight down. The 2-meter-long sword expanded again, turning into a 10-meter-long giant sword. The yellow sand in the sky swirled upward for a moment with Li Tianlan as the center. The Xianyuan sword, surrounded by sword energy, had already appeared beside Li Tianlan. The huge sword rotated slightly. With a dull whistling sound, Li Tianlan's body was sent flying. The huge sword body of the Xianyuan sword kept shaking, and the sound of the sword was endless. In Li Tianlan's sight, the sword light that filled the sky and the earth was getting brighter and brighter, but the range was getting smaller and smaller. The sword energy within a radius of hundreds of meters seemed to be condensing toward the Xianyuan sword. Li Tianlan's body landed on the yellow sand and slowly got up. The invisible sword energy was compressed to the extreme as soon as he stood up. The Xianyuan sword disappeared. A dazzling light spot suddenly burst out from the position of the Xianyuan sword, like a sword light, instantly illuminating the night sky. The light was so dazzling that it could be seen clearly even in the desert prison dozens of miles away. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. The huge sword body of the Xianyuan sword had fallen into nothingness in his perception. The dazzling sword light in front of him also seemed to be nothingness. But in the nothingness of the sword light, a clear sound of footsteps slowly rang out. The footsteps were very light, stepping on the yellow sand. There was an indescribable sharpness and danger in the sound. A figure walked out of the sword light, step by step. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. The Xianyuan sword had disappeared. The one who walked out of the sword light turned out to be another Li Tianlan. Or rather, it was Li Tianlan condensed by the sword energy of the Xianyuan sword. A little interesting. Li Tianlan laughed. Similar to the sword energy doppelganger, Li Tianlan's expression was calm and indifferent. There was no sound, and he was as quiet as a ghost. He raised his palm. It was the move that Li Tianlan was most familiar with. The first blade, Wuji. The pure and bright sword light suddenly turned into a natural arc of light in his hand. The arc of light flashed and arrived in an instant. Bang! Li Tianlan's feet stepped heavily on the ground, and a loud dragon roar suddenly sounded. The desert within dozens of meters kept roaring, and the yellow sand rising into the sky turned into giant dragons one after another. Li Tianlan's body strode forward and rose into the air. One after another, the giant dragons followed Li Tianlan and rushed forward with the yellow sand all over the sky. The huge arc of sword energy was torn apart by pure force when the giant dragons rose. Li Tianlan's body was getting taller and taller, and his limbs were stretched to the extreme. He fiercely smashed toward his other self on the ground like a cannonball. The fifth blade, flying snow. The figure condensed by the sword energy of Xianyuan's sword rose into the sky. The rain in the desert had stopped not long ago. The water vapor in the sky was constantly condensed in the sword intent. There was a clear sound of condensation in the air. A large area of ice imprisoned a large area of yellow sand dragons. Li Tianlan had landed from the air. Dragon fist, flying dragon in the sky. Crack! The huge and thick ice layer was smashed by a punch. The pale lightning burst out from Li Tianlan's body. His figure smashed the ice layer and the sword energy doppelganger in an instant. The blade of Xianyuan's sword appeared for a moment. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Tianlan directly reached out and grabbed the hilt. Xianyuan's sword, which was about the same size as Li Tianlan, almost instinctively quieted down for a moment. Then it seemed to remember that it was a battle, and the dark sword began to shake violently. Li Tianlan held the hilt tightly. The huge power of the dual wind and thunder veins all fell on Xianyuan's sword. Li Tianlan's figure was as steady as a rock. His face was a little pale, but his smile was extremely happy. I won. Crack! Before he could finish speaking, the exquisite Xianyuan sword suddenly shattered. The sword energy that seemed to be several times more terrifying than before broke out in an instant. The broken Xianyuan sword directly left Li Tianlan's control. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth suddenly twitched. Looking at the scene in front of him, he fell completely silent. Xianyuan's sword became an extremely delicate small sword again. The dark sword body floated in the air. But it was not alone. 4 small swords suddenly appeared beside Xianyuan's sword and slowly rotated around him, like stars surrounding the moon. Li Tianlan looked at the 4 small swords that suddenly appeared in silence. Every one of them seemed to be familiar, but he didn't know any of them. But every one of them seemed to have an inseparable connection with him now. They floated around Xianyuan's sword and formed a whole. They seemed to be observing Li Tianlan curiously. Li Tianlan was in a trance. At this moment he suddenly thought of a conversation in Yuzhou. The conversation between him and Li Guangtu. Chapter 779. How do you know that I've been to the Wang family of Beihai? If you haven't been to the Wang family of Beihai, how did you get it? You mean this sword is from Beihai? Do you still think it's a sword? You grabbed it and turned it into a sword, and then you can really deceive yourself into thinking that it's your sword? If it's not a sword, what is it? It's not a sword. It's the human emperor. The sword light diffused, the yellow sand fell, and the memory replayed. Li Tianlan seemed to return to the hospital in Yuzhou, facing Li Guangtu who had just woken up. Every single word of the conversation between the two of them resounded clearly in his mind. It's not a sword. It's the human emperor. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at the Xianyuan sword in his hand. He thought of Xianyuan Feng shining with eternal light over Mormons. That was the most complete form of Xianyuan sword. Silver moon, Tianguang, graceful, azure, horizon, twilight, void, judgment, phantom, magic weapon, East Emperor, heartbreaker, and Xianyuan. When the 13 swords were combined together, it was the complete Xianyuan Feng, which was also the sword formation of the 13-story building. This was an invincible sword formation. Its life, breathing, and every movement were the most perfect sword will. Li Tianlan never knew why Xianyuan Feng had its own life and will. This kind of life and will was so clear and powerful. Holding Xianyuan Feng, in the sword formation of the 13-story building, Li Tianlan really felt that he was facing a living life. The other party could express its own thoughts and will, but it couldn't speak. Such a sword was really a living thing. Li Tianlan had never figured out why. Whether in terms of martial arts or modern technology, there was no way to turn a dead thing into a living thing. He used to think that Xianyuan Feng devoured some murderous weapons and even the human emperor. But he ignored the fact that devouring itself was something that only living creatures could do. Moreover, he once owned falling stars and blue sky underworld. Although Li Tianlan could also feel the spirituality of these 2 murderous weapons, it was extremely weak and far from that of Xianyuan Feng. He didn't think that Xianyuan Feng could have its own will by devouring the murderous weapons. Until now. Until the scene in front of him appeared. He finally understood why the spirituality of the murderous weapon was so weak, and why Xianyuan Feng was a complete life form. The spirituality of the murderous weapon was weak. Because of their incompleteness. The 13 murderous weapons in the dark world came from the same piece of metal. That piece of metal was said to be a meteorite from outer space. Its whole body was full of vitality, and in historical records, it was known as the metal of life. The life metal that had been cut into 13 pieces had become a murderous weapon that could have vitality. This is already a miracle. But what if they were whole? What would they be like? Li Tianlan looked at the 5 small swords in front of him. It was as if they had met before, but it was also extremely strange. Li Tianlan raised his palm. A small silver sword surrounding the Xianyuan sword fell into Li Tianlan's palm. The delicate sword, only the size of a finger, rotated slightly, vaguely conveying a kind of excitement. Li Tianlan grew increasingly silent. Of course, he recognized this sword. However, this sword should not have appeared here. This was the Silver Moon Sword. And the Silver Moon Sword was now on the stone of formidable person. This was the second Silver Moon. One after another, small swords appeared in Li Tianlan's hands. The second one was Jade. The second Void. The second one was Verdict. Li Tianlan trembled all over. Beside him, the long broken 13th floor slowly emerged. That was the twilight and grace that originally belonged to the 13th floor. 4 new small swords integrated into the sword formation in the constantly rotating sword energy. The Xianyuan sword was in front of Li Tianlan. The 13th floor, which originally had only 3 swords left, suddenly became 7 swords. What's going on? Li Tianlan asked. The dark body of the Xianyuan sword rolled in Li Tianlan's hands, conveying a sense of doubt. It seemed that it did not understand what was going on, and it did not know what to say. It could not speak, but it could play dumb. Li Tianlan did not continue to ask. He thought of the 4 murderous weapons swallowed by the Xianyuan sword. Falling stars, blue sky underworld, divine light of void, twilight of the gods. It swallowed 4 murderous weapons. It became 4 swords. They were exactly the same as the 13th floor. Li Tianlan could not believe it, but the truth was in front of him. When all the evidence was in front of him, when all the impossibilities were ruled out, the remaining possibility, no matter how absurd it was the truth. The Xianyuan sword was the human emperor of the Wang family of Beihai. And Xianyuan Feng, it was the combination of the 13 murderous weapons in the dark world. It was a complete life metal. Li Tianlan recalled the eternal sword that tore the sky above Mormons. He vaguely understood that the sword was indeed the Chosen One's sword, but it was not just the Chosen One's sword. It was also equivalent to the 13 murderous weapons in the dark world firing at the same time. No one could resist that sword. Wang Tianzong could not. Even Dongqing Huangtu, who created the 13th floor, could not resist it. But the problem was that before Xianyuan Feng, the black world, among the 13 murderous weapons in the dark world, the endless sky was broken, the legend of Qin became a falling star, and the other murderous weapons were kept in the hands of the major forces and countries. How did Xianyuan Feng come? Was there a second piece of life metal that had not been divided? The invincible sword, Li Tianlan laughed, a little self-deprecating. It seemed that a shortcut suddenly appeared in front of him. Now, as long as he took back the 8 swords inserted in the Wang family of Beihai, found Wang Yuetong to take back the broken heart, and brought back Aquamarine from Sai City, the Xianyuan sword's energy storage speed doubled after swallowing the 4 murderous weapons. As long as the Xianyuan sword finished storing energy, he would be qualified to directly threaten the Chosen One even if he did not cultivate. What if he collected all the murderous weapons in the dark world? That was equivalent to 2 pieces of life metal to build a sword. How terrible would Xianyuan Feng be at that time? Would the 13th floor become the 26th floor at that time? His mind was a little confused, and he thought of Qin Weibai again. The Xianyuan sword swallowing the 4 murderous weapons was the plan Qin Weibai gave. But why did she hide from him? Li Tianlan's eyes were confused. The Xianyuan sword's blade shook slightly. In an instant, the other 6 swords around Li Tianlan flew out at the same time. The sword energy of the 6 swords filled the sky and turned into 6 Li Tianlans in front of him. The Xianyuan sword shook, conveying a kind of complacent emotion. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, waved his hand, and said calmly, "Go back." Crack. In the crisp combination sound, the 7 swords returned to one at the same time and appeared beside Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan held the hilt of the sword. This feeling was a real blood connection. The night was getting darker. Li Tianlan held the sword and turned to the prison. Dawn broke on the horizon. The pale golden sun shone on the desert prison, and the whole desert was golden. Li Tianlan looked at the familiar building with a calm expression. The roar of the helicopter's rotors came from afar. There was no advance notice. Or Li Tianlan didn't receive the notice because he didn't return all night. The helicopter landed slowly in front of the prison gate. In the flying yellow sand, the cabin door opened. A slender figure walked out of the helicopter and saw Li Tianlan, who had walked to the prison gate at first glance. Li Tianlan froze in place and didn't know how to react for a moment. When he had been completely disappointed, the figure that haunted him stood there bathed in the desert morning sunshine. Dreamlike, perfect and flawless. Chapter 780. For some people, no matter where they stood, they were the best scenery. She was like the bright moon in the night sky, the rainbow under the clear sky, and the oasis in the desert. The moment he saw her, Li Tianlan's originally dry and almost lonely heart suddenly became moist. It was not a surprise, but a kind of contented peace. His body slowly relaxed, and his eyes softened. Without any hesitation, Qin Weibai trotted into Li Tianlan's arms. She held him tightly with her delicate arms, rubbed her head against Li Tianlan's chest, and said with a soft smile, "Did you miss me?" "Every day." Li Tianlan's voice was hoarse and sounded as light as water. In more than a year, from the boss of the Samsara Palace living in the Dark World to the current patriarch of the Lin clan, her dressing style seemed to have changed a lot. The colorful dress on her did not look pompous, but had a kind of beauty that complemented each other. Not everyone, not even the so-called beauty, could control this kind of gaudy color. But in the desert morning wind, she, who was shining with colorful colors, had an indescribable gentleness and nobility. Li Tianlan's palm slid down her long hair, held her slender waist, and slightly tightened. Their hearts beat in sync and they were at ease. "I miss you. Every day." Qin Weibai took a deep breath and murmured. "Really?" Li Tianlan asked simply. "Are you angry with me?" Qin Weibai looked up at Li Tianlan and whispered, "There are a lot of things in the Lin clan. I didn't mean to hide from you." "How is the Lin clan?" Li Tianlan asked. He thought that he did not have the ability to break the Lin clan's principle of seclusion, but there was no doubt that Lin Fengting's attitude in Eastern Europe had shown a lot of things. At least in the process of the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, he could play an unimaginable role. Lin Fengting was now the #1 expert in the Dark World. Although such an ally seemed to stand aloof from the world, absolutely no one dared to despise him. Qin Weibai was silent for a moment, then said with a smile, "It's okay, but the Dark World has been a little chaotic recently. Although the Lin clan is secluded, it can't stay out of everything." Li Tianlan let go of Qin Weibai's exquisite and graceful body, took her hand, and walked to the prison gate. He said casually, "Tell me in detail." Qin Weibai did not move. She stood in front of Li Tianlan and opened her arms. Under the sunlight, her bright eyes were a little blurred. She said coquettishly, "I want you to hug me." Li Tianlan moved slightly. He paused for a moment. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan's expression carefully. She had just asked him if he was angry. But the other party directly asked about the Lin clan. "Don't be angry, okay? I won't leave this time. I'll stay here to accompany you," Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan sighed and bent down to carry Qin Weibai's body. The Xianyuan sword shrank again and jumped over Qin Weibai's head as if it was greeting her. Then, it hid in the sword formation. After the things in Eastern Europe are over, the Dark World is destined to be chaotic. Qin Weibai put her hands around Li Tianlan's neck, and her voice was a little lazy. "Because there are too many invincible realm experts dead and injured. Jiang Qiansong, Cass Rotter, Charlemagne Huan Kong, and the seriously injured King Tong and Paul. The superpowers in the Dark World are leaderless, and chaos is inevitable. These superpowers represent the interests of many fields. If the invincible realm experts die and there are no invincible realm experts among them, others will naturally target the huge interests represented by these superpowers. The Heroes Club, the Fantasy World, the Shadow Throne, and even the Men in Black. All countries are secretly taking action, hoping to incorporate some of the superpowers. And these forces are also fighting for power. Some forces with invincible realm experts are stirring up trouble. For the time being, they have no foundation. The invincible realm experts who were alone also want to fish in troubled waters. Even the headquarters of the Lin clan has received many requests for cooperation. They all hope that Mr. Lin can take action and even share half of what you get with the Lin clan. It's really a big deal, but I refused. Qin Weibai bit Li Tianlan's ear. The Lin clan that I control will only have you as an ally. A new invincible realm expert? Li Tianlan asked curiously. Mormon sword strike was like the clearest dividing line. After that sword strike, the new era had been fully revealed. Most of the older generation of invincible realm experts began to withdraw from the stage. The new invincible realm experts slowly appeared. Saint was the first. Wang Xiaoyao was the second. The third was Dijiang. The invincible realm experts appeared one after another, and it seemed that they were assembling a new divine and holy lists. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and whispered, "I'm talking about the kind of invincible realm experts who have no background. No background, no national position. This kind of invincible realm expert was undoubtedly the most special and the most precious. He was a figure worthy of being roped in by various countries. Such people rarely appeared in the dark world. In recent decades, there were only two. And they were both from Africa. One was Black Ghost. The other was Ramiro. But it turned out that Black Ghost was a pawn of the Jiang family of South America. And there seemed to be other forces behind Ramiro. An invincible realm expert with no background was more precious than a panda in the dark world. It's a killer. His code name is Ju. He's very ambitious. Now he's stirring up trouble in the Shadow Throne." Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes and curled up in Li Tianlan's arms like a cat. In addition, Jiang Guochu of the Jiang family of South America has also broken through. In more than a year after Eastern Europe, there have been 5 invincible realm experts in the dark world. "It's lively enough," Li Tianlan whispered. He walked into the prison with Qin Weibai in his arms. Xiao Qing had prepared breakfast and stood outside Li Tianlan's dormitory. Seeing Qin Weibai curled up in Li Tianlan's arms, she was obviously stunned and lost in thought. "Breakfast for her." Li Tianlan rubbed Qin Weibai's face with his chin, but he didn't introduce it to Xiao Qing. Xiao Qing handed the food box to Qin Weibai, and her bright eyes had become extremely dim. Li Tianlan calmly walked into his dormitory with Qin Weibai in his arms. Qin Weibai jumped out of Li Tianlan's arms and said with a chuckle, "There's something more lively." "What?" Li Tianlan asked casually. Qin Weibai opened the food box, took out the dishes inside one by one, and said slowly, "There's no exact information about the Wang family of Beihai. But according to some information sorted out by the Lin clan, some dark forces seem to have signs of joining forces. Among them, the Vatican and the 2 martial arts sects of East Island are the most active. The Jiang family of South America seems to have taken action." She hesitated, narrowed her eyes, and said softly, "Wang Xiaoyao of Snow Country seems to have taken action. They want to target the Wang family of Beihai?" Li Tianlan was stunned. "This is the best chance." Qin Weibai's tone was calm. "Different people have different purposes, but many people may want to completely destroy the Wang family of Beihai." Li Tianlan was silent for a while and said softly, "They can't do it. Zhongzhou State must be ready at this time, right?" "What about you?" Qin Weibai looked up at Li Tianlan with a smile. "What are you going to do?" Chapter 781. Standing in the dormitory, Li Tianlan hesitated for a long time. The Wang family of Beihai. No one could deny the strength and glory of the Wang family of Beihai, whether it was the so-called new era or the past era. Li Tianlan had never denied this. Even in his heart, the Wang family of Beihai had always been his most powerful opponent. More than 20 years ago, Kunlun City was the main force that pushed the Li family down from the altar, but Li Tianlan had never taken them seriously. Kunlun City was not weak, but they had too many flaws. The time of rise was too short, the foundation was too poor, and the sense of belonging was too low. More than 20 years were not even enough to establish enough tacit understanding with Zhongzhou State. If Li Tianlan went to the peak, he would not have any pressure to deal with such a force. But the Wang family of Beihai was different. It was a behemoth that was really rooted in Zhongzhou State and the whole dark world. Its power had expanded to such an extent that unless there was an irresistible natural disaster, there was almost no possibility of destruction, at least not in a short time. Otherwise, they would not be qualified to play with Zhongzhou State. Even in this special situation, the Wang family of Beihai could not be destroyed by a few so-called super forces because Beihai had Zhongzhou State behind it. When the loss of Beihai really touched the bottom line of Zhongzhou State would definitely take action. Zhongzhou State? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Which forces may attack the Wang family of Beihai?" "It's not sure yet." Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan's hand and asked him to sit at the table. She served him a bowl of porridge and said softly, "At present, only the Lin clan has received some information, and we are just speculating. The Vatican, the Jiang family of South America, Jifeng Sword Reigning School, and Wuji Palace, to be exact, the royal family of East Island, their recent actions are very obvious. But the Wang family of Beihai has not noticed this." "The Wang family of Beihai has not noticed this?" Li Tianlan was thoughtful. Even the Wang family of Beihai had not noticed it, so how did the Lin clan receive the news? The information comes not only from the Lin clan, but also from military counselor. Although Samsara Palace is gone, the intelligence system we built is still working. For some special reasons, our infiltration of the Wang family of Beihai is the most successful. About half a month ago, Jifeng Sword Reigning School took the lead in sending a group of spies into Beihai province. A group of spies infiltrated the North Sea province. After that, Wuji Palace and the East Island royal family also responded, followed by the Vatican and the Jiang family of South America. These forces all have experts of the invincible realm. The reason why these spies could avoid the sight of the Wang family of Beihai was that Wang Xiaoyao of Snow Country secretly did something to help them hide their identities. Wang Xiao, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, and a touch of mockery flashed in the depths of his eyes. "When I first saw him, I really didn't see that he was so ambitious." Qin Weibai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, she smiled and said, "Who can tell?" Before Wang Xiaoyao went to Eastern Europe, everyone thought that Wang Tianzong and Wang Xiaoyao were very close. After all, they were brothers. Wang Tianzong was really good to his younger brother and never guarded against him. When the old patriarch of the Wang family died, Wang Xiaoyao was less than 10 years old. Wang Tianzong brought him up completely by himself. The elder brother was like a father. Wang Xiaoyao made a lot of trouble for Sword Emperor and offended many people for him. One of them was a top big shot in the Southeast group. What was more ironic was that the top big shot of the Southeast group that Wang Tianzong offended because of his younger brother was now a supporter of Wang Qinglei, or Wang Xiaoyao. No one could have thought that the two brothers would go to this step, and no one could have thought that a real ungrateful person would appear in the Wang family of Beihai in such a weak situation. He helped the spies of the hostile forces to lurk in his own family. This was completely to fight for power and profit, and it was clear that he was a traitor. Li Tianlan thought of his first meeting with Wang Xiaoyao in Huading Garden and shook his head slightly. "Are these the forces?" Li Tianlan asked. In the Vatican, there was Moraid, an expert who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm. Jiang Guochu of the Jiang family of South America broke through the invincible realm. Jifeng Sword Reigning School had East Island's great grandmaster Yagyu Kurumi. And Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, was recognized as the #1 expert in East Island before the appearance of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. For invincible realm experts. For today's Wang family of Beihai, it was definitely a real big trouble. But could they destroy the Wang family of Beihai? Li Tianlan took it as a joke. "What's the attitude of Zhongzhou state?" Li Tianlan asked softly. "There is no clear information now. Zhongzhou state and Beihai don't know." In Qin Weibai's tone, there was a deep meaning. "Even if they know, I'm afraid they will pretend not to know at first." Sure enough, Li Tianlan's heart moved, and he suddenly realized that Qin Weibai's words meant something. "Even if they know?" he asked rhetorically. Qin Weibai sipped the porridge. Her movements were elegant and beautiful, and she didn't speak. Even if they knew, it was not an assumption. For this kind of thing, Zhongzhou state might or might not know now. But now it showed that they didn't know. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and confirmed his thoughts again. Most likely, the trouble that the Wang family of Beihai was about to face this time had the shadow of Zhongzhou state. At least there was the shadow of Wang Qinglei. Wang Xiaoyao had taken action, so it was impossible for Wang Qinglei not to know the news. Even all this might be planned by Wang Qinglei. If this was the case, how could Zhongzhou state not know? But now they kept silent. Obviously, the parliament of Xianxia state now hoped that the Wang family of Beihai would be chaotic. The more chaotic, the better. Their goal was clear as day. Only when the Wang family of Beihai was in complete chaos under the impact of the superpowers, Xianxia state would take action and wipe out everything. When the power of Xianxia state officially entered Beihai to help stabilize the situation in Mount Dibing, it would be very difficult to let them out. It's not just these superpowers I mentioned. These are just the planners. I'm sure that when they really put it into action, there will be more forces invading the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai has occupied the position of the first power in the Dark World for too long, and it has countless enemies. When there is a chance, someone will take the lead and all the forces, big and small, will emerge. It's not just the tradition of Xianxia state to beat the dog when it's down. Is the parliament so confident that Xianxia state can completely control the situation? Li Tianlan thought of all kinds of possibilities and shook his head subconsciously. Not to mention anything else, the 4 invincible realm experts were not easy to deal with. Where did the parliament get the confidence? Don't we have you? Qin Weibai laughed. When everything happens, the parliament will definitely send someone to find you. She looked at Li Tianlan. Or to ask you to go out and clean up the mess. That's why I asked you what to choose. Chapter 782. The ending of the Wang family of Beihai did not need to be considered. The various forces in the Dark World might beat the Wang family of Beihai when it was in decline. But in fact, as long as Xianxia state intervened in this war, there would be no possibility of failure. The key was whether Li Tianlan himself was going to do something in this war. Qin Weibai was right. Once the war started, the parliament would definitely send important figures to the desert prison, hoping that Li Tianlan would go to Beihai to clean up the mess. Now no one doubted Li Tianlan's combat capability. From Eastern Europe to Beihai, and then to Tianan, although his realm had not entered the Invincible Realm, he had a vague momentum of being the first person under the peak of the Invincible Realm. Moreover, he was the palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace. Once he took action, Wei Kunlun, another Invincible Realm expert in Xianxia state, would definitely take action. With the support of Xianxia state, it would not be difficult to keep Beihai province. Most importantly, once Li Tianlan went to Beihai to clean up the mess, no matter what the final outcome was, such an action was equal to another cooperation between Li Tianlan, the academics, and the Prince Group, which could also shake the cooperative relationship between the giant group and the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan was sure that as long as he agreed to help, the two groups would take more aggressive actions against the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan sat in his seat and looked at the breakfast in front of him thoughtfully. The situation between the major groups was constantly changing. At every moment, there would be a new direction in front of him. If I agree to go to Beihai with the parliament, what are the chances that Xianxia state will compromise with the giant group? She picked up a tissue and wiped the corners of her mouth. She lowered her eyes and said softly, almost 100%. At this stage, the main target of the academics and the Prince Group is not the giant group, but the Wang family of Beihai. If you agree to take action, it is tantamount to forming an alliance with them. They will help the giant group to complete the shuffle as soon as possible, and then push you to Beihai province to put pressure on the Wang family of Beihai together. What do I get? Li Tianlan asked with burning eyes. A lot. Qin Weibai's voice was soft. A lot. First of all, the problems faced by the giant group would be easily solved. This was equivalent to the cooperation of the three groups. The shuffle of Minister Dongqing would be smoother, and he could even try to snipe Yi Dongqing. Secondly, if you go to Beihai, Xianxia state will restart the Snowdance Corps again and grant you the rank of marshal. It may even give you the identity of a member of parliament at one time. If all of this goes well, when the North is destroyed, after that, you could become the new Legion commander of the North Sea Legion, or you could appoint a Vice Legion commander to represent you in the North Sea Legion. This is a truly prestigious position. Not only that, once their plan succeeds, Emperor Dong's palace may become one of the strongest forces in Beihai province in the future, and it will be qualified to keep pace with the Wang family of Beihai. Qin Weibai paused and said softly, Of course, it's the weakened Wang family of Beihai. And this process may take a long time. Sounds good. Li Tianlan nodded. Do you think I should say yes? Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Her eyes were full of meekness and she did not speak. Everything has its pros and cons. If I agree, what will I lose? Li Tianlan asked again. I don't know. Qin Weibai shook her head and reached out to hold his hand. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. There are many possibilities. Qin Weibai said in a low voice. If we cooperate with the parliament, some criticism is nothing. At least in the near future, there won't be too much trouble. What you will lose, maybe, is only Yue Tong. Completely lose her? Li Tianlan's body stiffened for a moment and he did not speak. But if such a thing really happens, Qin Weibai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Just say what you want to say. Li Tianlan smiled, picked up Qin Weibai and put her on his lap. His fingers that were sliding on her face gently touched her red lips. Qin Weibai rolled her eyes at him and shook her head. Tianlan, have you ever thought about it? If everything is as I said, and Zhongzhou state regains the military and politics of Beihai province, how will the Wang family of Beihai compare to the current Wang family of Beihai? It will be much weaker. It can even be said that it will be several times or even dozens of times weaker. If you join the fight against the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong's palace will control hundreds of thousands of troops of the Beihai Corps. At worst, you'll be the first commander. All the cities in Beihai province will have your voice. Emperor Dong's palace will also slowly develop in the next few years. At that time, while the Wang family of Beihai is constantly weakened, Emperor Dong's palace will continue to rise. The final result is that the Wang family of Beihai is gone, but Emperor Dong's palace will become the next Wang family of Beihai. I don't know what you think of this matter, but if I were the president of Zhongzhou state, after suppressing the Wang family of Beihai, after that, my next target must be Emperor Dong's palace. I will not hesitate to use all my power to completely control Emperor Dong's palace. It's only a few years. At that time, Emperor Dong's palace may be very strong, but it certainly won't reach the level of the Wang family of Beihai. And you, at that time, it's almost impossible for you to reach the peak. Li Tianlan's eyes were very calm. But at that time, the minister is likely to retire. At that time, the giant group will be dominated by Emperor Dong's palace. Once Zhongzhou state suppresses Emperor Dong's palace, the academics and the prince group will form an alliance again. Not only the academics and the prince group. If the southeast group is abandoned now, at that time, the remaining Wang family of Beihai and the southeast group will also destroy Emperor Dong's palace at all costs. After a few years, as long as Wang Tianzong is not dead, he will come out to control the situation. With his strength, it's not difficult for him to kill you. At that time, Gu Xingyun's injury will also recover. The next session of the Special Warfare Group will also have a director. At that time, all the people of the academics, the Prince Group, the Southeast Group, and the Special Warfare Group will be suppressing Emperor Dong's palace, right? Li Tianlan asked. Qin Weibai nodded. I don't know what the final result will be. At best, you and Emperor Dong's palace will become a sharp sword in the hands of Zhongzhou state. At worst, the giant group will be destroyed. Emperor Dong's palace, the Dongcheng clan, including you and me, everyone will not have a good end. Li Tianlan laughed, and his eyes were a little cold. So I think someone from the academics and the prince group will come to you soon. It's even possible that Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing will show their sincerity in person. They can give you a lot. As long as they can give you everything. The Beihai Corps, even the speaker of Beihai, your status as a counselor. As long as you want, they will give you everything without any hesitation. Qin Weibai's voice was low. Because they all know that no matter what they give you, they can take it back in a few years. No matter how arrogant Emperor Dong's palace is, it will not be more difficult to deal with than the current Wang family of Beihai. So you think I should help the Wang family of Beihai get through the current difficulties? Li Tianlan asked. This is just my suggestion. Qin Weibai whispered. In fact, leaving the Wang family of Beihai to help us bear most of the pressure is the best choice. She leaned in Li Tianlan's arms, raised her head, bit Li Tianlan's neck, and said softly, "No matter what you decide, I will listen to you." Chapter 783. If it really happened, I will go and take a look. After breakfast, Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai, who was quietly clearing the table. He lit a cigarette and finally told her his decision. Such a decision didn't mean anything. He only said that he was going to take a look, that was all. Not all cooperation could be built on friendship. In fact, most of the time, the most stable cooperation was when both parties were enemies. Most of the time, whether or not two real forces wanted to cooperate was not based on the benefits of the cooperation, but on who the opponent was. Now that the Wang family of Beihai was already weak, it was difficult for them to face the parliament of Zhongzhou state, which was in full swing. And Emperor Dong's palace, which had just begun to grow, could not face such a colossus. Especially when Ning Qianxing, the mayor of Xianyuan City, was pushed down by Li Tianlan, it was impossible for the parliament to have no thoughts about Tianan. Li Tianlan coming to the desert prison could also represent the opinion of the parliament for a period of time. Li Tianlan didn't think it was a wild ambition to try to control Tianan. What he wanted was nothing more than a foundation that belonged to himself and the Li family. This was his bottom line, the bottom line that coincided with the Wang family of Beihai. All the cooperation between the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace was based on this bottom line. Even children knew that if the lips were gone, the teeth would be interdependent. Emperor Dong's palace might not be qualified to participate in this game, but Li Tianlan, who represented the giant group, already had enough chips. Under such circumstances, supporting the Wang family of Beihai and letting the Wang family of Beihai bear the pressure was tantamount to escorting the development of Emperor Dong's palace. Today's Wang family of Beihai really needed such support. It could be said to be timely help. As for the alliance with the academics and the Prince Group, not to mention the bitter consequences in the future, this operation alone was nothing more than icing on the cake. By the time the Wang family of Beihai got through the current predicament, Emperor Dong's palace would probably have officially risen. At that time, the bottom line maintained by the two sides might be clearer, and the cooperation would be firmer. Li Tianlan understood the reason. He could understand right and wrong, but it did not mean that he was willing to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai for a long time. Wang Tianzong, Summer Solstice, Wang Xiaoyao, Wang Qingla. Li Tianlan was silent. He didn't think it was possible for him to become friends with them. There's no chance of that. Therefore, he only said that he would go and take a look. He felt aggrieved at the thought of this kind of cooperation. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and suddenly remembered the scene when the Wang family of Beihai supported him before he entered the desert prison. At that time, was the Wang family of Beihai in the same mood as he was now? You still can't let go of your past grievances? Qin Weibai cleaned up the table and smiled slightly. The fall of the palace master, the demise of the Li family, too many people, too many lives. Can we really let it go? Li Tianlan looked straight into her eyes and said, I understand the reason, but how can there only be reason in life? Qin Weibai's body stiffened for a moment, and she sighed softly. She was not her. Therefore, from her personal standpoint, it was the most correct and stable way to join hands with the Wang family of Beihai. She couldn't understand the kind of hatred Li Tianlan talked about, and it was precisely because she couldn't understand that her behavior was the purest, unaffected by any grudges. Li Tianlan couldn't do it. She, who was sleeping in Switzerland, could not do it either. That was why she once said that she would let the Wang family of Beihai fall into hell forever. This was not viciousness, but great hatred and fear. The era, which she didn't know was the past or the future, became a boundless shadow in her heart. The unforgettable dream determined her position, thoughts, and means. But a new era had come. It was a new era that she had never experienced, and it was also a new era that she had personally created. Therefore, in Mormons in the sword formation covered by the 13-story building, she raised the Xianyuan blade and activated the eternal sword light that had been buried for many years. She thought that she no longer had any positive value, so she flew to the sky. She killed the chosen one with her sword and fell into darkness forever, but she had no regrets. And Qin Weibai appeared beside Li Tianlan. That meant that everything had passed. The brand new her stood here, representing the most rational and clearest perspective. Qin Weibai grabbed Li Tianlan's palm and carefully worded her words. She would not ask Li Tianlan to do anything, but she would do her best to help Li Tianlan walk on the most correct path. Can you let go of Yuetong? She is the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan stopped smoking for a moment. He put out the cigarette butt and said sullenly, she no longer belongs to the Wang family of Beihai. She just doesn't belong to me now. Qin Weibai said seriously, when the Wang family of Beihai is really facing a catastrophe, do you think she will go back? Li Tianlan was silent. Qin Weibai smiled and said, or we can find her first and ask her to go back. Li Tianlan frowned and asked, what do you mean? I mean, nothing can't be let go. The only difference is what we can get. Qin Weibai said softly, the parliament of Zhongzhou state can see what I can see. The parliament can see it, but why can't the Wang family of Beihai see it? In the near future, the parliament will definitely send someone to contact you. As for the Wang family of Beihai, even if they can't receive news from the major forces now, they can see the current situation clearly, so they will definitely send someone to talk to you. It's unlikely that summer solstice will come. It's likely that Wang Xianxia will come. He is now the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and can promise a lot of things. If you feel uncomfortable with this kind of cooperation, you can make some requests that make you feel comfortable. Wang Xianxia won't refuse, and he can't refuse. Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai thoughtfully and said softly, requests that make them feel uncomfortable? Such a decision is very important. If you refuse the parliament, Emperor Dong's palace will definitely be affected to a certain extent. The Wang family of Beihai must make up for this. They must also give enough compensation for the past grievances. Besides, do you remember what happened in Reki City? Qin Weibai suddenly asked. What do you mean? Li Tianlan froze for a moment. Reki City. What Wang Tianzong told you. Qin Weibai said softly, you don't like the Wang family of Beihai because of Wang Tianzong. Or, you don't like the Wang family of Beihai because of Wang Tianzong. Maybe you will also feel uncomfortable if Wang Xianxiao is the patriarch. Qin Weibai lowered her head and whispered, what if your woman becomes the new patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai? Will you still dislike the Wang family of Beihai with Yuetong as the patriarch? What if she becomes the patriarch and gives you a son in the future? Compared to the conditions offered by Zhongzhou state, Qin Weibai looked at the speechless Li Tianlan, held his hand, and said softly, these are the things worth talking about. Chapter 784. Li Tianlan took a deep look at Weibai. It was not until then that he understood what Qin Weibai wanted, or what she wanted to help him get. Let Wang Yuetong become the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. These words could be said to be earth-shattering. But the last sentence, asking Wang Yuetong to give birth to a son for Li Tianlan, seemed to be somewhat meaningful. If this was a plan that lasted for decades, then what would the situation be like after decades? This was indeed the most worthy of discussion. But the problem was that he didn't want what Zhongzhou state was willing to give him, and the Wang family of Beihai might not necessarily do what he asked. The giant group and Emperor Dong's palace were the only allies that the Wang family of Beihai could choose. But on the other hand, the giant group could only count on the southeast group. Cooperation was mutual, and both sides had needs. At least for now, both sides needed each other's support. If Li Tianlan made this request to Beihai, the possibility of the Wang family of Beihai agreeing was infinitely close to zero. They could accept paying some price in other aspects, even a huge price, but it was impossible for them to hand over the entire Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan thought about it carefully again and shook his head. It's unlikely. It might even be impossible. There's no harm in talking. Qin Weibai whispered. Li Tianlan smiled bitterly and said nothing. This problem was almost unsolvable. If his talent in martial arts was not so terrifying, if Wang Xianxia could catch up with him, everything Qin Weibai envisioned would not be impossible. But on the other hand, if Wang Xianxia could keep pace with Li Tianlan, the Wang family of Beihai would not need Wang Yuetong to be the patriarch. Li Tianlan had left the younger generation behind. Wang Yuetong became the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and gave birth to a son for Li Tianlan. How old was Li Tianlan when their son became an adult? He was only 23 years old this year. 20 years later, he would be at his peak, truly invincible in the world, and even have a ruling power that far surpassed Wang Tianzong's. At that time, if Li Tianlan wanted his and Wang Yuetong's son to be the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, no one could stop him. If the Wang family of Beihai could agree to this condition, it was almost equivalent to accepting the fact that the Wang family of Beihai would become a vassal of Emperor Dong's palace 20 years later, or even be annexed by it. Li Tianlan was indeed tempted by such a prospect. But the probability of this happening? No, there was no such probability at all. This completely smashed the bottom line of the Wang family of Beihai and stepped on their faces. The Wang family of Beihai cannot tolerate with this. Even if they were facing a life-and-death situation, their existence was still indispensable to Emperor Dong's palace. The matter of the next generation can be postponed, but they should be able to accept it if Yue Tong takes over. Qin Weibai looked up at Li Tianlan and said seriously, "The question is, where is Yue Tong now?" Li Tianlan murmured to himself, stroking her hair. To this day, he could still clearly remember the scene of that little woman piercing his heart with her sword. Helplessness, despair, and misery. That night in Mount Dibing was the last time he saw Wang Yuetong. Under the effect of the immortality potion, her injuries quickly healed, and she left the North Sea province. It had been more than a year. The Wang family of Beihai was looking for her. Emperor Dong's palace was looking for her. The Samsara palace was looking for her. Countless informants and intelligence agencies were looking for Wang Yuetong. But there was no sign of him. She seemed to have completely disappeared. She did not contact the Wang family of Beihai or Emperor Dong's palace, as if she had completely forgotten the world. The new city plan she proposed in Tianan was officially on track, but where was she now? Qin Weibai was silent for a long time and did not speak. "I'll wait for them to come," Li Tianlan whispered. "During this time, the most important thing is to improve my own strength." Qin Weibai said obediently, "Have a rest." Li Tianlan touched her face and said with a smile, "I'll keep watch." Qin Weibai nodded. From Switzerland to Zhongzhou State and then to the desert, she did feel a little tired after traveling non-stop. "I'll sleep for a while and get up in the afternoon." She sat on Li Tianlan's bed and pulled the quilt away. The colorful dress was taken off under the quilt and placed to the side. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little hesitant. He looked at every corner of the dormitory and seemed to be thinking about where he should go to meditate. Qin Weibai held the quilt, bent her legs, and sat up, revealing her snow-white shoulders. The faint fragrance lingered in the dormitory, natural and rich. She tidied her hair, looked at Li Tianlan with a smile, and said softly, "What are you looking for?" Li Tianlan touched his nose awkwardly. "I'm meditating." Qin Weibai looked at him and shook her head. She stretched out her snow-white hands and said with a chuckle, "Come on." Xiao Qing, who was a little disappointed, forced herself to come to the outside of Li Tianlan's dormitory. When she was about to clean up the breakfast box, she saw her aunt standing outside the dormitory with a red face. She was hesitant, as if she wanted to leave but didn't want to leave. Her body trembled slightly, and her beautiful eyes were watery. She bit her lips, and her face was full of bitterness. "Aunt," Xiao Qing whispered, "what's wrong?" The young woman with a plump and proud face was shocked. She looked at Xiao Qing in a panic and shook her head. "No, nothing. Why you here? I'm going to clean up His Highness's breakfast." Xiao Qing looked at her in confusion and took 2 steps toward the dormitory. "Don't." The young woman grabbed Xiao Qing's arm, and her breathing was a little rushed. "Don't go." Xiao Qing frowned, thinking of the woman she just saw who could no longer be described as simply beautiful. Her heart was sour, and she stood there in a daze for a while. Cough, cough, cough. A slight cough suddenly came out as if she was choking on water. The sound was very light, but it was very urgent. The young woman next to Xiaoqing suddenly shivered. Does she have a cold? Xiaoqing blinked. She should be changed to another dormitory. The young woman glanced at her, and her eyes were a little blurred. Faintly, a subtle voice came out of the dormitory, charming and soft. You want to kill me? Don't get up. I only feel like my woman when I'm kneeling. Xiaoqing blinked blankly. She saw her father coming over from the corner of her eyes, and subconsciously raised her voice and called, Dad. The dormitory suddenly became quiet. A few seconds later, Li Tianlan suppressed some annoyance in his voice. What's the matter? Xiao Mahai was stunned, and no one knew what he was thinking. He was a little embarrassed and said unnaturally, Your Highness, I just received a notice from the Parliament. The Parliament will send someone to visit His Majesty tomorrow. This was undoubtedly a very important news. So even if it was a little inappropriate, Xiao Mahai had to come. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and asked, Is it President Li Huaqing or Prime Minister Qin Fangqing? Xiao Mahai took a deep breath, suppressed the shock and absurd feeling in his heart, and slowly said, Both? The President and the Prime Minister decided to visit His Highness in the desert tomorrow. He said the news, but he couldn't believe it himself. The President and the Prime Minister came to visit Li Tianlan together. Chapter 785. Over the past 1 year, Wang Qinglei had always been in the limelight whenever he came to Yuzhou province. No one knew what this powerful figure, who was competing with Mount Dibing for the control of the Wang family of Beihai, was thinking. Everyone only looked at the facts. In fact, every time Wang Qinglei came to Yuzhou to report to Li Huaqing, something always happened in Zhongzhou State. These matters could be big or small, but when all of them were linked together, it was enough to make anyone's scalp go numb. Wang Qinglei was already like this when he came to Yuzhou. As the president of Zhongzhou State, Li Huaqing inspected Wuyue, and his influence would only be greater. Li Huaqing's decision to inspect Wuyue was very sudden. It was as if he had gone down for a walk on a whim. Everyone who received the news felt a little uneasy, especially within the Southeast Group. Because of Li Huaqing's itinerary, the Southeast Group had already set off a storm. The game that had been going on for more than a year was still ongoing. The situation was not clear, but everyone knew that the election in a year's time was the real key. The situation that the Prince Group and the academics teamed up with Wang Qinglei could not be changed. But 1 year later, no matter what the result was, they were bound to slow down their offensive and seek a new balance. At that time, the Southeast Group might still be under a lot of pressure. But compared to the current situation where everyone was in a panic, the Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai should have a breather. Before that, the Prince Group and the academics, which had been strong for a long time, were bound to make a big move against the Wang family of Beihai, temporarily drawing an end to their game over the past year. The goal of the two groups was obvious: the governor or speaker of the North Sea province. But to achieve this goal, it was unknown how many people would fall in the process. More than a year of planning all this was not enough time, but Wang Qinglei was too familiar with the Southeast Group. Now Li Huaqing suddenly wanted to inspect Wuyue at this point in time. In the eyes of most people, this was a signal that the two groups were going to launch a general attack on the Wang family of Beihai. Especially at this point, Prime Minister Qin Fangqing was inspecting Huading. Huading was so close to Wuyue that it made people's imagination run wild. Countless people were guessing and on guard. After a short period of preparation, Li Huaqing, who barely concealed his intentions, had already arrived at Jinling, the central city of Wuyue. He no longer needed to hide anything. Victory was in his grasp. As for the extent of his victory, that would depend on Wang Qinglei's preparations. But whatever. No matter what, with his re-election next year, the academics would be in an invincible position. At present, more than 6,000 elites have sneaked into Beihai, including 6 invincible realm experts, more than 80 thundershocking realm experts, and thousands of fire-flaming realm elites. There are also a large number of intelligence personnel among them. Once the chaos starts, hundreds of important places in Beihai province will be attacked at the same time, including the new core of Beihai Core, some weapon research rooms, the headquarters of the 7 sword-holding families, and the provincial government of Beihai. Of course, most of the main forces are gathered in Mount Dibbing. Such a force is enough to completely destroy the internal security forces and the Heaven Punishment Troop on Mount Dibbing. Jinling Provincial Government. In a spacious office in Building 1, Wang Qinglei opened a map and pointed at a location. He looked at Li Huaqing in front of him and spoke in a serious tone as if he was really reporting important work. 6 invincible realm experts? Li Huaqing suddenly raised his eyebrows, seemingly a little surprised. Where did it come from? Invincible realm. At any time, they were the superiors standing at the peak of the Dark World. When most of the invincible realm experts had withered, he couldn't figure out where Wang Qinglei found these 6 invincible realm experts. Jifeng's Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace have 2. Knights Templars have 2. In addition, His Majesty in Knights Templars has contacted the Jiang family of South America. Jiang Guochu has entered the invincible realm. He is very interested in the Wang family of Beihai and even hired the only invincible realm killer in the Dark World today. Wang Qinglei said slowly. Tianhai Wuji had been close to the peak of the invincible realm more than 3 years ago. Yagyu Kurasumi's invincible realm had also been completely stabilized. The current head knight commander of Knights Templars, Moraid, was even stronger than Tianhai Wuji. The strength of the mysterious His Majesty was unknown, but he was definitely much stronger than the average invincible realm expert. Jiang Guochu of the Jiang family of South America seemed to have relatively poor qualifications, but among the several major forces, the Jiang family of South America could use the most resources. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, although Jiang Qiansong and Jiang Qianyan died in Eastern Europe, the Jiang family of South America still developed rapidly in the last year or so. Because in the chaos of Eastern Europe, Jiang Qiansong and Jiang Qianyan were not the only invincible realm experts who died. When most of the invincible realm experts were seriously injured or killed, the Jiang family of South America, which had lost the invincible realm experts but gained the invincible realm experts in a short period of time, was extremely stable. With Jiang Guochu's breakthrough, the Jiang family of South America dominated South America and gained a lot. This time, it also contributed a lot. As one of the top superpowers in the Dark World, the foundation of the Jiang family of South America was undoubtedly much deeper than that of the 2 martial arts forces in East Island and Knights Templars. The last one was the invincible realm killer, Zhu, who was now very flamboyant in the Dark World. Zhu's specific realm was unknown, but he was a killer, an invincible realm killer hiding in the dark. Even the peak of the invincible realm would not easily ignore him. The 6 invincible realm experts had their own characteristics and strong combat capability. Such a lineup, when fully prepared, could cause irreparable trouble to the Wang family of Beihai. Li Huaqing glanced at Wang Qing, frowned, and suddenly whispered, "Can these people be controlled?" "Don't worry, President. There's no problem." Wang Qinglei's tone was calm. "What about the Jiang family of South America?" Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. "Their headquarters are in South America, and they are interested in the Wang family of Beihai." "What do they want?" Wang Qinglei paused slightly and said slowly, "Jiang Guochu is cooperating with us this time. He is interested in the Wang family of Beihai mainly because of us, or Zhongzhou State. He hopes that after we solve this matter, we can provide him with the necessary help." "For example?" Wang Qinglei said slowly. "For example, we can check and balance the Lin clan." Wang Qinglei said quietly, "What he wants is the Heroes Club. As long as the Jiang family of South America annexes the Heroes Club, they will dominate South America. In fact, he has already started to act, but he was warned by the Lin clan and had to stop." "You agreed?" Li Huaqing asked. "The Lin clan can't be used." Wang Qinglei shook his head. "Since they can't be used, there is no need to think too much. They just want to protect their own branch. At that time, we can bypass the branch of the Lin clan and help the Jiang family of South America. We can also get good returns." Li Huaqing lowered his head and took a sip of tea. After thinking for a while, he said slowly, "When will we act?" About a month later. Wang Qinglei narrowed his eyes and suppressed the desire in his eyes. They still need some time to prepare to mobilize more people and resources. Li Huaqing nodded. In Zhongzhou State, who is more suitable to clean up the mess in Beihai? Wang Qinglei suddenly asked, "Gu Qianxuan?" Li Huaqing shook his head, and his eyes were deep. "I will go to the desert tomorrow with the Prime Minister. Li Tianlan." Wang Qinglei's pupils contracted. Li Huaqing smiled and said calmly, "I hope he won't let me down." Chapter 786. The wind on the stage of Formidable Person was getting cooler. It was still autumn in Zhongzhou State. The temperature in Beihai Province, the northernmost part of Zhongzhou State, had dropped rapidly, and the northern part of Beihai was about to be heated. When Wang Shengxiao, who was wrapped in a coat, woke up from his meditation, it was already night. It was raining. The fine rain blew from Beihai with the cold wind, dark and bleak. Wang Shengxiao sneezed subconsciously. He stood up and looked at Beihai in the distance. The wind and rain roared from the sea level. The water of Beihai floated slowly. Wang Shengxiao closed his eyes and carefully felt the sea in the distance. The sky was silent and deep. The sea was vast and deep. The majestic sword energy between the sky and the sea seemed to have completely stabilized, as if it had completely integrated with the world, Beihai, and the sky. Wang Shengxiao laughed. In his perception, the sword energy in the distance was so clear and heavy. It stood on the sea level, but the sword intent had quietly spread to Mount Dibing. Every time Wang Shengxiao meditated, he could feel the sword energy slowly fluctuating with the sword intent all over the sky. That was the swordsmanship of the Wang family of Beihai. The supreme swordsmanship. Wang Shengxiao was more and more reluctant to leave the stage of Formidable Person. Only in this place, when he sensed that sword chi, could he truly calm down. The boring cultivation, the complicated matters, everything seemed to become smooth and smooth in this place. In the night, under the wind and rain, the sword energy that had spread to the stage of Formidable Person slowly began to retreat, gathering toward the deep sea, like the ebb and flow of the tide. Wang Shengxiao waited until the sword intent completely disappeared, then he took a deep breath and slowly turned around, saying, "Sixth sister." An enchanting figure quickly appeared on the stage of Formidable Person. The enchantress, who had resigned from all her posts in the Sky Academy, stood in front of Wang Shengxiao and said respectfully, "Patriarch." Wang Shengxiao looked down at his watch and asked, "Is he here?" "He's going up the mountain. Xian Ming has already gone to pick him up," the enchantress said softly. Wang Shengxiao nodded and said, "Go down and pick him up." The enchantress said yes, turned around, and quickly walked down the stairs. Wang Shengxiao stood in front of the stone of Formidable Person, squinting at the silver moon on the top of the stone of Formidable Person, and lit a cigarette. The sword energy of the silver moon sword, which had already dimmed, shone again as the sword intent in the deep sea receded. The slender blade swayed gently in the night wind, as if it was looking down at Wang Shengxiao from above. Wang Shengxiao subconsciously touched his chest as if he could still feel the pain. Now he was a superior of the half-step invincible realm. In the past half a year, he had made rapid progress. He had tried to pull out the sword from the stone of Formidable Person more than once, but he had never succeeded. The only time he had tried his best, he had been enveloped by the sword aura of the silver moon, and he had been severely injured. Wang Shengxiao closed his eyes and felt humiliated again. This humiliation was not limited to the stage of Formidable Person. It was also located in one of the 7 cities of the North Sea province, in the most important place of the 7 great clans. Every time he saw Silver Moon, Wang Shengxiao always felt that the entire Wang family of Beihai had been trampled on. The most ironic thing was that the person who had humiliated the Wang family of Beihai by dropping several divine weapons was the person whom the Wang family of Beihai had to rely on. Wang Shengxiao threw the cigarette butt on the ground and looked up at the silver moon emitting clear light in the night sky. He was expressionless, like a statue. Light footsteps came down from the top. The enchantress walked up the stage, a formidable person with two figures. Wang Xianxia came back to his senses, turned around, and showed a natural smile. "Uncle Lu, long time no see." He took the initiative to speak with a smile. Behind the enchantress was Xianming, who was in charge of all the intelligence agencies of the Wang family of Beihai. Behind Xianming was Lu Shuanghua, the chief of Jiangnan Society, who used to be in charge of the intelligence in the south of Zhongzhou State and now controlled all the intelligence organizations of the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. Compared with Xianming and the enchantress, who had watched him grow up, Wang Xingxiao was more polite to Lu Shuanghua. "Patriarch." Lu Shuanghua nodded, his expression serious and dignified. "Uncle Lu, what can I do for you?" Wang Xingxiao asked. Lu Shuanghua took the initiative to meet him this time, and he didn't even tell Xianming the reason. Wang Xingxiao couldn't think of what could make him so cautious. "It's just some messy information, but I think I should tell you in advance." Lu Shuanghua didn't talk nonsense and went straight to the point. "Go ahead." Wang Xingxiao nodded. "There's something wrong with Wuxia and Tiannan recently." Lu Shuanghua frowned. According to reliable information, Yagyu Kurasumi, the leader of Jifeng Sword Training School, appeared in Jinling the day before yesterday and secretly visited speaker Wang Qinglei. In an instant, the pupils of Wang Xingxiao, Xianming, and the enchantress contracted at the same time. Jifeng Sword Training School. Wang Qinglei. "Are you sure?" Wang Xingxiao took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I'm sure." Lu Shuanghua's voice was calm. And at the same time Yagyu Kurasumi went to Jinling, a visiting professor of Wuji Palace also went to Tiannan Sky Capital. Wang Xingxiao gritted his teeth and breathed quickly a few times. Jiangnan Society now controlled all the intelligence forces of the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. But as for Lu Shuanghua, the strongest coverage of his intelligence was undoubtedly several provinces in the south that were recognized as the territories of the Southeast Group. Jiangnan, Jianghuai, Wuxia, Men, as well as Xianxia and Huding. In the first 3 years of Tiannan, it was in the hands of the Wang family of Beihai. Dijiang led the Freedom Corps at that time, and Jiangnan Society also had a great layout in Tiannan. These could be said to be the direct forces of Lu Shuanghua. It was not surprising that he could receive the news that Yagyu Kurasumi went to Jinling and Wuji Palace went to Tiannan. The most important thing was why Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace went to Tiannan. In addition, the Northeast has been a bit chaotic recently. All kinds of signs show that the martial arts forces of East Island have established some contact with Chairman Wang Qinglei. I even suspect that many elites of other forces have sneaked into Beihai province. That's impossible. Xianming shook his head and interrupted Lu Shuanghua directly. If someone sneaked into Beihai, I would have gotten the news. Some of the spies arranged by Wang Qinglei are under control. Their movements are normal. Are you sure you have everything about Wang Qinglei in Beihai? Lu Shuanghua glanced at Xianming and said gently, "Well, even if you have everything under control, don't forget another person." Wang Xingxiao raised his eyebrows. "Wang Xiao." Lu Shuanghua lowered her eyelids and said blandly, "He is even more familiar with Mount Dibing and the Wang family of Beihai than Wang Qinglei. If someone sneaks into Beihai, Wang Xiaoyao is fully capable of hiding them. For so many years, we have been defenseless against him. Who knows how many pawns he has?" In the current situation, it is unusual for the master of Jifeng Sword Training School to visit Jinling. If I'm not wrong, this should be the precursor of their attack. Wang Xingxiao did not speak. "What precursor?" Enchantress asked subconsciously. "At this stage, we have stabilized our position. This is not what Zhongzhou State wants to see. Now what they want most is chaos in Beihai province. In this way, Zhongzhou State has enough reasons to intervene in the affairs of Beihai province again. Wang Qinglei will be the vanguard, and Jifeng Sword Training School should be an external force that Zhongzhou State borrowed. They sent elites to sneak into Beihai, and Wang Xiaoyao hid and accumulated strength. Hey! Lu Shuanghua shook her head with a smile. This traitorous thing. Xianming's voice was cold and depressed. There was no doubt that he was talking about Wang Xiaoyao. This seemed to be the first time that an important figure of the Wang family of Beihai made an evaluation of Wang Xiaoyao. At least in front of Wang Xianxia, this was the first time. Wang Xianxiao's face changed and he waved his hand. Don't say that. His smile was a little bitter. Second uncle is not a bad person. He paused and whispered, it should be because he has been suppressed for too long. What the hell does he want? When His Majesty was here, did he do anything wrong to him? Now he is helping outsiders. He wants to destroy the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Qinglei wants the position of the parliament, and he has a motive. What about him? He destroys his own family. What can he get? Xian Ming waved his hand excitedly. His eyes were full of killing intent and disgust. Wang Xianxiao was silent for a while and took out his mobile phone. I don't know. He opened the communication software, sent a video, and said hoarsely, but we can ask him directly. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.